Xenoblade Chronicles 3 released July 29th, 2022, the third game in what had now become a trilogy, plus the X, that just had a definitive edition announced very recently after recording the script actually. Xenoblade had long been one of my favorite series, one of the key aspects being for the storytelling, so the prospect of a new title which incorporates the worlds of both Xenoblade 1 and 2 seemed like a dream come true. I hopped in, ready for my socks to be blown off, and they never really were. The story toys around with interesting ideas at times, but doesn't explore them nearly as well as the prior two games in the saga, and the overall storytelling is just sloppy, feeling like things happen because that's the way they need to happen to achieve the outcome the writers want, rather than feeling like events unfold as a consequence of the actions of the characters in the story. In today's long overdue video essay, we'll be delving into the story of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Unlike my Pokémon video essays, we'll only be exploring the story in this video, because that's already a lot of ground to cover, and because over 2 years later, the gameplay experience isn't exactly fresh in my head anymore. If you want a review of the other aspects like I usually do on my video essays, then here's a really quick speed run. The visuals. This is an incredibly visually charming game. The characters all have key design features to set them apart, even among the 7th party members you can recruit. The two factions of Kevis and Agnes, you can look at the characters from one or the other side and be able to tell which side they're on at a glance. The world is gorgeous and has to be one of the most impressive worlds on the Switch, though I feel doesn't quite carry the same wow factor as the previous two games being on Titans. There was only one area I encountered a bit of lag from time to time, and even then it wasn't anything major. And right now, over 2 years later, I honestly don't remember where that is anymore. Monolith Soft really knows how to optimize their games for simple hardware like the Switch. Compare that to Pokémon Scarlet and Violet or Legend of Zelda Echoes of Wisdom, which lag out the wazoo, and it's like night and day, despite those two being much bigger IPs and much smaller worlds. The soundtrack, it goes pretty hard, but I think the best soundtrack out of the three is Xenoblade Chronicles 2. The area themes are pretty fitting and really relaxing so much of the time, but none of them left such an impression on me that I'd be able to easily imagine them in my head after the fact, like I can with many areas of Xenoblade 1 and 2 and even X. The chain attack theme is good, but the fact that it interrupts almost every other theme in the game and just takes away from what's supposed to be emotional moments is pretty silly. The game has a main leitmotif it uses throughout, which sounds amazing and is used fantastically. And the new theme of engage the enemy or counterattack, this time called the Weight of Life, is really incredible. The gameplay, from what I remember of it since this was a while back, I felt like combined the gameplay elements of Xenoblade 1 and 2 fairly well. The class system added customizability that I enjoyed. I found it way too easy to die though. Xenoblade 1 and 2 had 3 party members on the field at once, with most expected to stay alive most of the time. If you lose someone, that puts you in a bad position, so you revive them and spend some time recovering from that situation and getting back into the battle. In Xenoblade Chronicles X, you have a party of 3 or 4. It's a very similar situation until you start engaging in more skill combat. In Xenoblade Chronicles 3, you use 7 party members at once in battle. So, to balance it out, any one party member, especially non-tanks, will get shredded very easily, especially on hard mode, which I played on, because I always play games on the hardest difficulty here. So, during difficult battles, I found my party members dropping like flies, and me needing to run around reviving constantly. And often in these situations, I'd still win because the boss would keep on being chipped away at. You can switch who you're playing anytime, which is really nice, and as long as someone's still alive, you can revive them, either by switching to them yourself or by the AI doing as they should. So there were battles I'd mostly just be running around on revive duty, and still win the battle. While tanks can hold their own a lot better, if one of your attackers or healers takes aggro, they will die incredibly quickly due to how flimsy everyone is, to make up for the fact that you have a 7-character party. Not a fan of the chain attacks in this game. In Xenoblade 2, there were clear-cut rules for the conditions to extend a chain attack and do well during it. You can use a similar execution to consistently do well. But in Xenoblade 3, these character bonuses you get are random. There's going to be 7 total for the 7 party members, and it'll give you 3 at random. Then in round 2, it'll be from 6, 3 choices, then from 5, 3 choices, so on. And the order you select them in can make a huge difference, so hope you like RNG. And having a set-in-stone party of 6 characters that you can customize around a lot, and a 7th slot that you can fill with 1 static character, and who's significantly worse outside of chain attacks, from dozens of choices just feels odd. The boat is janky as hell and probably one of my least favorite vehicle driving experiences in a video game. And I remember having some difficulty with the menuing and map. But at this point, I don't remember what exactly, I'm gonna be honest. There. That's my speedrun review of the non-story elements. If you want something more in-depth and done more recently after beating the game, just check out the finale part of my Xenoblade Chronicles 3 series and skip to the credits. I always give my full reviews of games during the credits. The focus of this video essay, however, is to really dive deep into the individual elements of the story, where it succeeds, where it fails, how it compares to previous titles, and ways it could be improved. These story aspects won't be taken in any particular order, so you can jump across the different chapters of this video however you wish. Expect full spoilers for the Xenoblade Chronicles trilogy, and a smidge from X, but nothing super major. You're not going to get a ruined experience by playing Definitive Edition after this. In my Pokémon essays, I've gone through the plot summary at the same time as the plot analysis, so even if you go into the video knowing nothing about the story, you understand it through the video. This video aims to just be analytical, rather than outlining the events of the story. So we're going to do a really quick summary that I'm going to ensure is quick by going through it purely from memory over 2 years later. That should cover all the key stuff, right? Hopefully I don't get things wrong. At least my analysis was almost all written shortly after beating the game, unlike this plot summary that I'm writing shortly before making the actual video. If you're already familiar with the story, feel free to skip to the first analysis chapter, Level of Threat. Xenoblade 1 and 2 are 2 separate worlds, but connected to one another since they were once one world. The worlds want to come back together though, but they're like matter and antimatter to each other, where they'll annihilate each other and become energy in the form of light on contact. The people of the 2 worlds realize this, so they contact each other and work together to build Origin, a means to essentially save and load your game. Save just before being destroyed, and then load data after being destroyed, and then everything is restored. Oh no, but what if it doesn't work and we all get destroyed? When the 2 worlds contact and Origin activates, this worry some feel becomes Moebius, represented by Zed, the embodiment of the fear of moving toward the future, because what if the future is bad and Origin doesn't work? So Zed hijacks Origin and keeps the world trapped in the endless now, creating a new world with content from the 2 worlds, preventing them from destroying each other because this all takes place in one moment in time. Time isn't flowing, so the matter and antimatter can't annihilate each other because they don't have the chance to, and yeah. The inhabitants are put into a cycle of endless war, with Xenoblade 1 people called Kevis and Xenoblade 2 people called Agnes, pitted against one another eternally. Anytime a soldier dies and their life energy is harvested, they just respawn as a kid and start again with their memory erased. If they survive 10 years, Moebius lets them get to their homecoming, where that faction's queen comes before them to have some sick flute music laid out, which kills them. If you don't go to your homecoming, you just fade out anyway and start another life cycle again. Sometimes some people desert and have their own kids outside of that 10-year cycle, who founded the City, which are their own mixed factions separate from the 2 sides at war. Moebius controls each of these colonies, giving them orders and pitting them against each other. Enter our hero Noah and his friends Lance and Uni. They're Kevis soldiers fighting against Agnes. Noah is an Offseer. He plays the flute for the dead people at their homecoming to see them off, or for the dead who fell in battle to have their souls move on. Their colony is tasked with securing an important payload, not knowing it's the City faction they're targeting, and not knowing what the City faction even is at this point. It seems like an Agnes colony is after this too, as they show up and we're fighting our 3 Agnes main characters of Mio, Senna, and Taion now. Moebius D shows up to kill our non-important party member shortly before he would have reached his homecoming, because he's here to secure the thing too. The main guy transporting this important thing, Vandam, sees the heroes' faces and is like, whoa, those 2, I gotta use this thing, because Noah and Mio have fought against Zed with the City in previous lives, and he recognized them. So he activates the thing and turns them into Ouroboros, allowing them to come together to collectively pilot a flesh mech and be super strong. So then Moebius D is like, whoa, you're like me, but not as strong now, and proceeds to get his ass handed to him. So then he activates the Moeb signal and says the whole world will be your enemy. Vandam dies so that he can't reveal things about the plot yet, but tells the heroes there exists a true enemy they must fight. The heroes are like, that sure was weird, but anyway, see ya, and go back to their respective colonies. But turns out their colonies want to attack them now, so they come back together and set out on a journey together. Mio only has 2 months left to her 10-year term, though, so the heroes are on a time limit before she dies to defeat the true enemy. Turns out Noah's sword is super strong, so when a colony with an old comrade, Ethel, comes after them, he's able to destroy the flame clock and break the need for that colony to feed it lives to keep it going, liberating the colony. You go around liberating colonies and defeating or killing the Moebius controlling those colonies along the way, as the heroes continue to be reunited with old friends from these colonies. One of the Moebius, however, is an old friend of Noah, Lance, and Uni's, Jorn, who had died as a kid saving Lance, and appeared the same age here now as a Moebius. The main Moebius, Zed, will sometimes give people the option on death, instead of respawning, to live as a Moebius themselves who can live forever, but if you're killed, you're dead. Jorn was tired of struggling to do so much of anything while his friends were always so amazing at everything, so he becomes a villain in Moebius and is now a villain you must face. Moebius isn't done with Ethel though, and threatens her into subordination by showing the destructive power of their Annihilator and threatening to use it on their colony, and pits her together with her Agnes rival Kamaravi to face you in battle. They're more interested in fighting each other though, to the point Kamaravi rips out his eye that connects him to his colony's flame clock that allowed Moebius to control him when they wanted. Then him and Ethel kill each other, and later respawn so they can be optional party members. And then you kill the Moebius who pitted them against you in the first place after you find out they confused together to become more powerful too. Seems like the world isn't quite perfectly stable though, as the Annihilator and staying in Ouroboros or Moebius form for too long can create an annihilation event, where part of the world is just destroyed, where I suppose you could say time resumes momentarily so the opposing matter annihilates the other. The heroes set out for the Kevis castle where the Annihilator is, since that's a powerful tool in the enemy's hand the heroes figure they should destroy. One of the destroyed colonies the heroes find evokes some memories in Uni connected to a past life, where they were getting a little close to the max rank where they don't have to fight anymore, so Moebius D showed up to kill them all. We make it to the Annihilator where we battle Moebius D and J, Jorn. Uni overcomes her fears of the one who killed her once before, and the heroes destroy the Annihilator. Heading deeper into the castle, we find the respawning pods, and face the Queen of Kevis, who turns out to be a robot. Here we face N, which is a version of Noah that decided to become Moebius rather than respawn, as he'd rather spend eternity with the one he cares about rather than lose her over and over again. He's about to destroy us when the city swoops in to grab this batch of respawn pods and hightail it out of there. We make our way to the city, find out these are respawn pods and the city is trying to free as many people from the cycle as they can, though some in the city are opposed to it. Previously unknown concepts like children are introduced to the heroes, as well as what a peaceful life looks like. The city leader tells the heroes the way forward is to find the true non-robot Queen of Agnes, and the key to her is currently being held by Gondor, who's in an Agnes prison. We're also told Moebius can track people through the thing in their eyes connected to a flame clock, even if that flame clock has been destroyed, so they start wearing eye patch jammers over those eyes. The heroes sneak into the prison to meet Gondor, not going into Ouroboros forms in prison and removing their eye patches to blend in, even though realistically that means the villains will now know where they are. So the heroes make a plan to bust out of prison with Gondor, and they do, but the villains are waiting for them on the other side. Not because they were tracked, but because an old friend of Gondor's who seemed to be helping you out, Shania, ratted you out, because she'd rather be part of the endless cycle of life and death instead. Here we meet with Moebius M, the counterpart to Mio who became Moebius along with N when he chose that path, and we find out that her power is manipulating consciousnesses, or something. Lance and Senna almost defeat N in a sacrifice play by trying to create an annihilation event, but then Console X shows up with a magic bullshit staff that undoes Ouroboros and allows the villains to win. While the heroes cannot win here, they make an opening for Gondor to escape with the key to the Agnes Queen, and then throws the heroes in prison. Here the heroes are held until Mio's remaining time is up and it's time for her homecoming, and the heroes are powerless to save her. They are marched out to witness the homecoming, where N then reveals to the cast and the player, Yeah, you're dead if you die during a homecoming, and Mio was Thanos snapped away. Noah has some sort of vision showing him past lives where he failed to defeat Zed, and failed to protect Mio, and he's asked by a mysterious figure if he's willing to keep moving forward even if he has to do so alone, or would he take the path of N? To which he basically answers, I don't know, maybe I do what he did, but I'll try not to. The mysterious figure is revealed to be Mio, so she's like, alright, well let's keep moving forward then. Turns out, with the ability to manipulate consciousness, M body swapped with Mio after telepathically telling her the full story during their first battle. So it was really M that died in Mio's body, while Mio's alive in M's body. So then N gets all pissed off when he realizes his cat girl got snapped away, the very thing he pursued this dark path for. Now the heroes suddenly have the power to fight back, and the magic bullshit staff that undoes Ouroboros just doesn't work on them now, and they defeat N. Uh-oh, it's not over though, because turns out there's another Annihilator, and it's aimed right at the city. It fires, seemingly destroying the city. Nope, never mind, the city figured this might happen, so they preemptively moved the city before that happened. So Shania's plan failed, and she plays Persona 3. Mio with M's memories revealed that when N took the deal to become Moebius, part of the deal was he had to destroy the city. So he embraced the dark path and killed his comrades and destroyed the city, much to M's dismay. Apparently enough people escaped to just found a new city anyway, though. Now we set out with Gondor's key to the Queen, and we find the Queen, but oh no, Moebius DJ followed us here now that Mio's half Moebius, so the enemies can always track her somehow, and they just killed the Queen. We face D and J. Yorn reveals why he went villain. The heroes are like, those negative thoughts about you aren't true, you were always awesome actually. Meanwhile, Moebius D just relentlessly bullies Yorn and orders him around. So Yorn kills D in a sacrifice play, and that's the end of them. The Queen heals her injuries and turns out is just fine. The Queen of Agnes, Nia from Xenoblade Chronicles 2, reveals the story of Origin, explains how Zed hijacked it using the Kevis Queen, Melia from Xenoblade Chronicles 1, essentially being the key to Origin's functions. She also reveals how she gave the key to her keep to Consul M way back, who had later given it to Gondor. So she tells us to go to Origin and defeat Zed to end this endless now and have the world resume from where it had frozen. Luckily, Anopon just so happened to be working on a ship that could make it to Origin. So after some mandatory side questing getting him the parts he needs, we head into Origin while all the colonies we liberate attack Origin and all the drones it deploys for the final battle. The heroes face N one last time, who's still all pissed off, feeling entitled to Mio and seeing Noah as the one who took her away from him. After battling, Noah explains how N symbolizes regret, and he symbolizes hope, and convinces N to have hope for a better future again. Then N vanishes, and the heroes free the Kevis Queen. On finally reaching Zed, the final foe is confused as to why they don't want to be part of the Endless Now, where if you give it enough time, everybody's eventually a winner in this world. Besides, the future is uncertain and scary. The heroes want to end the Endless Now, so they battle Zed and defeat him. Also, N that previously vanished is now back again coming out of Noah, and M who died is now alive again coming out of Mio, since she's a part of her and N is a part of Noah, to sacrifice themselves one final time against Zed, who is now no longer Zed, but a single intense emotion, and they embody that same emotion, so only they can defeat Zed, and they sacrifice themselves a second time. Well, first time for N, second time for M, whatever. This world is now going to be deleted in favor of the way the worlds once were, where time flows once more. That means everybody as part of the cycle are going to go back to their old lives, separated from those from the other world they met here, that being the sacrifice Noah had to be willing to make to keep on moving towards the future. Oh, and everyone born in this world, like the city folk, will just die, but we're not going to dwell on that too much. And so, time resumes from right where we left off at the beginning of the game, Origin having successfully reloaded each of the two worlds after they made contact and destroyed each other. Before this happened, the characters talked about how they'll for sure meet again one day, and Noah hears Mio's flute and goes around the corner where it's coming from before vanishing to leave the ending ambiguous. Obviously, I skipped a lot there, but hopefully if you're not already familiar with the story, now you've got a good idea of the context in the story where the analyses of this video will take place. Hopefully I gave it some proper context. Alright, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the story. All three Xenoblade Chronicles titles put our characters up against a group of opponents that will be difficult to overcome, which serves as a reason for them to continue to get stronger on their journey. In Xenoblade 1, it's the Mechon, for the majority of the adventure at least. Xenoblade 2, it's the faction known as Torna. Xenoblade 3, it's the consoles, Moebius. The same name. Moebius is like the crazy big form and console is like the human form, I guess, but they all count as being Moebius. Whatever. Which I feel like are the weakest villains of them all, and therefore feel the least threatening in the trilogy. Let's quickly go through them all. The Mechon are introduced to us in the opening cutscene of the game, a merciless and formidable force capable of conquering an army, to the point that most troops are retreating and only a brave few press forward. We've seen what they're capable of. So when we see the Mechon attack Colony 9 after the first couple hours, a colony not expecting such an attack and being far from prepared, well, you have a good idea what to expect here. What's more, the one ace up the hero's sleeve, it doesn't work, even when in the hands of someone who isn't dying as a consequence of its use. The villain kills a character with an established connection to our hero, which sets him on the path of revenge. There's no way this battle can be won, and our heroes only survive it because the villain is called back. And so, the journey of revenge begins. The first major foe is Zord, who taunts and plays with the cast by using a hostage. Once again, the Monado does nothing. It seems darn near impossible to inflict any damage, but there's one small glimmer of hope the heroes have. Location. It's the Ether Mine, and the Ether River is surging below. Shulk's been aware of this possibility of victory with his visions of the future, and the cost associated with it. Athoron attempts to drive Zord into the river, but it's not so easy. This leads into the sacrifice play, which the heroes are only narrowly able to avoid thanks to Shulk's visions. Zord drowns in the river below, and the heroes escape. Just kidding! During their escape, it turns out Zord is so formidable that he dragged himself out of the raging river below. It's not going to be that easy. But at least he can be damaged now due to the damage to his armor, and he's finally defeated for good. It truly takes every ounce of the hero's strength to only narrowly achieve victory in a battle it seemed they couldn't win without sacrifice. Here's some relief. Respite at last. The heroes are only afforded a few minutes to catch their breath before Metalface finds them, the figure that they set out on this journey to find and defeat. The tables have been turned as he's also actively hunting the heroes and catches them directly in a trap. And not only that, but he's not alone. We've just experienced how nearly impossible it is to defeat Zord, and now here we are surrounded by them, perfectly visualizing impossible odds. Other heroes join in on the fight, but even so, it's still a hopeless situation. They're only bailed out by a Telethia, an agent of the Bionis, as the Bionis has other plans for them. The hero's own strength is not enough yet. Were it pitted against these foes, it would have undoubtedly been the end of the journey. The Mechon are a daunting threat, who could appear at any time and risk bringing an end to the heroes had it not been for their sheer luck scraping them through so far. But how long could this luck last? This threat isn't going away, driving home the need to become stronger and setting the heroes on their path towards where they'll find that strength. In Xenoblade Chronicles 2, Jin is so OP that he's just able to straight up anime zoom and stab the hero during the intro chapter, leaving him for dead. He's proven in our game introduction that he's more than willing and capable of killing our hero, because that's exactly what he does. Rex is only saved by him having interacted with Pyra's core crystal, and her willingness to share her life force with him, because of her having seen him from Mithra's visions hundreds of years prior, so she knows he's important to seeing this journey through. With his newfound strength, Rex and Pyra can put up some of a fight against Malos alone, who seems to be established to currently be the weaker of the two, since he's like, "Don't bother, Jin, I can take him." And even so, our heroes can't actually beat him. In the face of Malos, Jin, and a freaking battleship, the only option is to escape, which can't be done without consequences, even if those consequences are alleviated by Azurda's revival. Jin establishes he can kill one of our main characters, and the Force of Torna establishes they can kill a main character too. The party's goal is Elysium, rather than seeking out their foes like Xenoblade 1. but their foes are still seeking them out as their target is the Aegis, Pyra, so Malus can regain his true strength as a fellow Aegis. Chapter 3. By this point we've made more friends, most notable here being Vandam. The foes track down our heroes and are able to easily overpower them. It seems to be a repeat situation. Rex is advised to retreat in the face of impossible odds. He refuses, and as a result, Vandam dies as a consequence of this choice. The foes are not to be trifled with, and in trying to take them head on, there will be consequences. Even when Mithra emerges in an effort to save Rex and seemingly turns the tables against the enemies for a time, this quickly turns around the moment we see Jin unleash his true power, where the heroes are completely at his mercy. Xenoblade 2 has antagonists that require the heroes to retreat, because when facing them head on, there will always be consequences. It makes you feel like the heroes' lives are genuinely in danger. The characters feel this, and so does the player. Then there's Xenoblade 3. We're not really sure what it is we're fighting for, we're just as in the dark as the cast, and it's one of the mysteries that will have to be solved as the story progresses. I guess we're fighting to find out the truth, whatever it may be, and destroy flame clocks? After meeting Vandam, because Xenoblade loves its Vandams for some reason, we're introduced to the concept of the real enemy. Who is it though? Not sure, though maybe it has something to do with this big bad who appeared. He is definitely pretty threatening, getting a kill count of 3 during this sequence, none of which are characters who feel important, unlike series past. But after unlocking interlinking and Noah assumes an Ouroboros form, he wins, and Moebius D retreats after getting his butt handed to him. Xenoblade 1 and 2, the heroes cannot win when first facing their foes, but in Xenoblade 3, they just win first try. Wait, doesn't he go to town on the whole party later in the plot when all 6 of the cast are capable of assuming Ouroboros forms? But here, he just gets his butt kicked by Noah alone, who's done this for the first time? Okay, I guess? Though I guess maybe you could argue Noah still has the feel for it from previous lives, but I'm pretty sure the game explained the only memories that could carry over were extreme emotion. At least that's what I have written down in the script. It's been a while since writing most of it and since playing the game. Progress the story, we face Colony 4. This colony is being manipulated by a console, and it turns out each console can assume Moebius form, without even needing to interlink with another console. He's an incredibly difficult foe, healing from the flame clock, and with the heroes presented with a potential sacrifice, they'll need to find a way around. This case being Ethel, as her life force is being drained to heal this dude back up. But once the heroes figure out how to break it, does he still fight tooth and nail to the bitter end like Zord? Nah, quick boss battle and he's dead now. No more tricks up his sleeve, and he's pretty hard to take as a serious threat considering how pathetic he is.
Impossible! The flame clock cannot be broken! What is this? No! No! But why? How could I have failed? I just wanted to play around a little more! No!
Next up, helping Valdi in Colony 30. Here, we beat a console who was piloting a Ferronis, which explodes and kills him. Well, unless you play Alexandria's Ascension quest, in which case it turns out he lived, and then you kill him. Colony Tau and Juniper. Yeah, this console doesn't really care at all, to the point they never even show up. They're either incredibly lazy, or maybe the smartest villain ever.
Somebody in here? Something wrong? Nope.
And if we decide to do some side content too, Colony 9 console, he gets killed. Colony Gamma console, gets killed. Colony 11 console, killed. Along with Console W, who just kind of shows up out of nowhere and dies 2 minutes later. So on and so forth. A lot of these can be pretty hard-fought battles, but each one the heroes win, and without any consequences. The consoles don't feel like a threat. Anytime we run into one of them, we kill them. If they're important to the story or need to show up in a future hero quest though, we defeat them and they're like, I'm outta here, see ya. Not the heroes narrowly scraping victory or even just surviving by sheer luck. No, they win, and the console has to retreat. Moebius D later in the plot. He is giving the heroes a genuine challenge, but gets outsmarted and defeated yet again. He even ambushes us at one of the most critical moments a second time, and is defeated again, this time for good. Also, as an aside, it seems like a pretty strange time to prove he can kill somebody vital, so late in the story in comparison to the other games. And in previous games, there's always a sacrifice. Fiora loses her humanity. Melia's Daddy-O is dead. Rex and Pyra and Mithra lose their individual lives, their lives now being tied together. Azurda loses his big Titan form. Vandam loses his life. Nia in 3 gets hurt, but it's ultimately a debate because she lives. Sure, he also kills Vandam earlier in the story, but not because he's a character we as the player have an emotional connection to at this point, but rather because he threatens spoiling too much of the mystery if he stays alive. He has to die or else there's no mystery to uncover.
His name is...
He never beats us, is never stronger than the heroes, and therefore is never a threat to the heroes. And then there's N. In Chapter 4, he sicks the Queen robot on us, and she's incredibly tough and seemingly impossible for the heroes to defeat. But much like an Xbox 360, she randomly dies. The heroes are safe. But not for long. N's about to show how formidable he is, right? Nope. Here's the lost numbers that conveniently create an escape route for the heroes during the attack. As for N's strength, we see him deflect some bullets, I guess, but we honestly know nothing about his strength in comparison to the heroes. Is he a threat? Is he not? Who knows? We've never seen a comparison of his power to the heroes. Metalface and Zord, best watch out because they've proven themselves incredibly difficult foes. Malus and Jin, if you run into them, you're screwed. Get out of there ASAP. Consul N? Who can really say if the heroes can take him? The writer should have saved the Lost Numbers attack until after N demonstrates his strength and has the heroes pinned. That way, the player knows to fear him. So he shows up at the end of the next chapter. Is he a threat then? Oh, turns out he is. Yeah, gotcha. Easily overpowering our heroes and bringing them to their lowest point. It seems like he may be defeatable with sacrifice, such as Xenoblade 2 Vandam, or almost a Thoron, when Lance and Senna try to sacrifice themselves to kill him. But turns out the enemies have the magic bullshit staff that just cancels that out because reasons. So by the end of Chapter 5, the heroes are brought low, but the disaster is averted with Mio being saved, and the heroes are given a chance at a rematch. Do the heroes have some new power, like the Monado's shackles being broken, or the true Aegis revealing herself? No, not really. I mean, I guess Mio's half Moebius now? Does that make her stronger? It's not really established, especially since this scene only really shows Noah fighting N, who now wins easily. The heroes are able to destroy N 20 minutes of cutscenes after he was destroying them with ease. They do pull the Sword of Origin out of nowhere with no explanation or lead up except for maybe some of Riku's words hinting, but this isn't even the thing that makes it possible to win. It closes the battle, sure, but they were already winning even without it. So is N a threat, or is he not? It feels like he's a threat when it's convenient for the plot for him to be, and a pushover when it's convenient for the plot for him to be. I can't take the threat in this game seriously. It's nowhere near the same level as Xenoblade 1 and 2. Previous games would give the player ups and downs as the power balance shifts. In Xenoblade 3, the enemies go from being barely a threat to an incredibly serious threat suddenly out of nowhere during Chapter 5's closing, and then it immediately shifts back at the beginning of Chapter 6. What a joke. To visualize the power balances of the 3 games, I made this chart, where red is the enemies are stronger, blue is we're not quite certain right now, and green is the heroes are obviously stronger. And if you want an engaging plot, you should have shifting power balances. In Xenoblade Chronicles 1, we're not entirely sure in the beginning because the Mechon are super strong, but Dunban is able to stand up to them with Monado. But then after Colony 9 is attacked, it's like, oh yeah, these guys definitely have the advantage, and they keep it for a long time until the Monado 2 is unleashed. And now we have greater power for a little while, then we lose it when the Apocrypha is activated, but then eventually we destroy the Apocrypha and we have the advantage again for a little bit, and then Zanzu's revived and it's like, oh my goodness, there's like no chance of the hero's victory here. Maybe we see like the slightest glimmer of hope, And we only clearly get more power right at the end of the game with the True Monado. In the beginning of Xenoblade Chronicles 2, we have our first fight where Rex is killed, and then the cast of heroes has to flee. Then as we're being hunted down by Torna, we clearly see that the enemies are still stronger than us as Vandam is killed. But then suddenly we seem to get more power when the True Aegis is awoken. And so we defeat some other members of Torna with Mikhail and Petroka. But then we get to see Jin's real strength and Hayes is killed, and it's like, okay, we are definitely not in the advantage here, and we are left in that fearful state for a decent while. Hyra and Mithra are taken away, and things seem really hopeless. But then eventually we awaken the True Aegis, and we have the advantage. Then you can just forget that advantage the moment that Malos summons Ophion, and now we're brought down to Moritha, and now we're kind of working together with our enemies for a little bit, and we're not entirely sure what's going on here, and at this point Malos has his true power as well, and he's super formidable, so we're not really entirely sure up until the end, when it turns out, yes, we did have the strength to win. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, we don't really have a clear enemy to be judging our power with up until we unlock Ouroboros and we face Moebius D. Then we defeat him, and we kill or defeat every single console that ever stands in our way for so much of the game. Then it seems like we're pitted up against greater strength the Robot Queen, that just malfunctions. And we have no idea how strong N is because he didn't exactly get the chance to fight. But then in the next encounter that N confronts us, it's like, okay, yeah, he's clearly more powerful. And then we fight him again 20 minutes later, and we beat him. What? And then from there we go on a never-ending win streak. We lose a whole one time in Xenoblade Chronicles 3. That's it. And it's a loss that turns into a win 20 minutes of cutscenes later. So the fact that it turns around into a win so shortly after, and the fact that there's no real consequences, it just makes that loss forgettable rather than impactful, unlike some of the losses from Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2. The heroes are able to get through hardships without experiencing sacrifice, and able to overcome their foes each time, except when the plot specifically needs them not to. Oh, but Ethel and Kamaravi died. That's the heroes experiencing sacrifice. Ultimately, they didn't die because the consuls killed them. They died because they won an epic battle to the death. The consuls just made it a bit easier for them to do that. The heroes don't really lose anybody to the consuls. Ethel almost dies to a consul, but she's alright. Ethel and Kamaravi kill each other. Wamba, you didn't know long and had death flags all around him. Vandam, you just met and is killed off, so there's still mystery to uncover in the plot. Mecha friend you only just met and gets repaired anyway. Some of the prisoners you only just met. And Nia, who just gets pissed off. Yorin is sacrificed, but not as a hero the cast needs to lose, but rather as a villain who completes his redemption arc through death. And almost all of these characters respawn anyway, so the game basically tells you the only death you should actually care about is Mio's. Except it turns out it killed M, not Mio. Except it turned out it didn't actually kill her either. So why are you supposed to care about these deaths if they're just going to be Uno reverse carded anyway? Everything just feels rather convenient in this story and like there's no real consequences, which I find really surprising for the entry in this trilogy that I thought would have embraced sacrifice the most, considering its themes and overall message about needing to sacrifice to be able to move forward and embrace the uncertain future. Villain with connections, Metalface and Moebius DJ. Metalface was honestly a fascinating villain in several ways, and it feels like Xenoblade 3 attempts to employ a version of Metalface itself, being Moebius DJ. First, let's look at Metalface. One of the things that made Metalface great was his connection to the heroes. We got to see Mumkar the way he used to be in the opening cutscene, and how he's still very much the same person he was then. He's seemingly killed off, but he's given a second chance at life on the side of the Mechon, strikingly similar to how Xenoblade 3's characters such as Moebius are given another chance at life as one of the consuls after being killed off. The introduction creates a connection between him and Dunban. He serves as a target of Shulk's malice, having been responsible for Fiora's death and leading the attack on Colony 9. He serves as a prevailing threat in the plot, striking out of nowhere in the beginning, tracking down and attacking our heroes just as they're recovering from their last hard-fought battle. showing up right as the heroes are on the verge of unlocking a new power, along with establishing a connection to another of the heroes by killing Bird Dad, and arriving to ruin the day right when the heroes get a glimmer of hope. And can I also say, the way the game handles objectives here is incredible. Shulk initially begins the adventure to kill all Mechon, with Metalface at the forefront. This drives him to acquire the power he needs to defeat Metalface, investing the player in the story as we work towards that power. And at Prison Island, goal achieved, we're stronger than Metalface now. So, now what'll happen? But before we even have time to consider that now what, we get immediately introduced to the next story objective, Fiora. In this way, the story doesn't have any lull with the heroes asking what they should do. The new plot arc is no longer centered around unleashing the Monado and killing Metalface, but rather saving Fiora, while Metalface becomes more of a what do we do about him now character, with some mixed feelings in the party. Shulk sets out on a journey driven by rage, but as he begins to learn the truth, he lets his rage dissipate. He begins to see the humanity in his foes, both literally and metaphorically. He can't ever forgive Metalface, but he loses the will to kill him. Dunban, on the other hand, is the model hero at the beginning, who's the type of person who saves everybody, no matter the cost to himself. However, having an old friend reveal his true colors as this monstrous villain, it breaks Dunban, and now he's determined to kill Mumkar. We see these two sides clash in the final encounter against Metalface, as Shulk appeals to the Dunban who he knows ultimately wants to set out to do what's right. In the end, Metalface is the one who accidentally kills himself, which doesn't really make any sense logically, like, wow, that was insanely unlucky for him, but makes a lot of sense symbolically. Because while Shulk and Dunban by the end are willing to let go of their rage to focus on what's important, having moved past this plot arc of single-mindedly destroying their foe, Mumkar is still focused on that, and it leads to his undoing. Ultimately, despite being a villain who isn't at all humanized like the other main Xenoblade villains often are, being a foe who's just wholly evil for the sake of being evil, or generic jealousy, his service to the plot has to be some of the best I've ever seen in story writing. Now then, Moebius D. He, too, plays a large influence in setting our heroes out on their journey. While Metalface kills one of our main characters with a strong connection to both Shulk and Dunban, Dirk, the name of Moebius D, kills the generic party member ally in our party who was on his final mission before retirement and had so many death flags around him to the point I would have been genuinely surprised if he didn't get killed off. He also kills Vandam, but that feels more tailored towards keeping our heroes and player in the dark, needing to work for the secrets Vandam would have otherwise revealed. He's not really a figure to be despised like Metalface, he's just a character for the player to be mildly irked at, I guess? As the plot goes on, turns out he does actually have a connection to one of our heroes, Uni, having killed her in a previous life when he killed off a colony that had reached gold rank. He becomes a figure for her to overcome. But while I feel like Xenoblade 1 and 2 would have this be something that's developed and overcome across multiple encounters, Uni's just able to get over it in the immediate next encounter. That was easy. She uses his reliance on her fear to deceive him into having the tables turned, which is pretty neat, but still feels pretty convenient how this happened in the immediate encounter after realizing he's killed her before. This is brought up, and then solved, just like that. In the final encounter, this isn't even brought up again, because it got resolved in one fell swoop in the last encounter. Dirk himself, he once lived as a normal soldier guy too, even with claw weapons like Mumkar did. He was a brutal killer who enjoyed taking lives regardless of the faction. Why? Who knows? His life before becoming Moebius has no connection to the heroes though. While Metalface was like, whoa, it's the guy from the prologue who ran with Dunban but ended up betraying him, and now the two are squaring off. He's also the guy who murderized Fiora and Bird Dad. Dirk, on the other hand, is, whoa, it's the guy Tyon read about in a book once.
I read about him in a textbook. An Agnian soldier from long ago who'd gone mad.
I'm not given any reason to care. He's just a convenient antagonist who exists because, well, somebody has to be evil to harass the heroes throughout the plot, as our main antagonist would rather eat his popcorn and watch movies on true stories rather than get involved. Metalface and Moebius D serve a similar role in the plot and exist as a figure who's just evil for the sake of being evil, But while one serves as an integral catalyst to the story being told, the other is just like some boss you beat sometimes, who Uni is able to overcome her fear of easy peasy.
I'll bury the world in my sweet collectibles.
I think I'm gonna hoe.
And before moving on to Yorin as a character, following up on the last section discussing level of threat, our metal face stand-in of Moebius DJ never feels all that threatening. First encounter, Ouroboros is used for the very first time, and absolutely whoops him. He hightails it out of there. Yorin as a standalone boss, we beat him and he's like, that's enough fun for today, bye! Moebius DJ guarding the Annihilator, he's suddenly destroying you. But with Uni completing this plotline on her fear just like that, he soon gets wrecked and has to retreat again.
Run away! Run away! Run away!
Final encounter, you just beat him again, this time for good. Unlike Metal Face, he never wins, and he's never on the verge of winning had it been for external factors outside of his control. Unlike Metal Face, he's not a threat, he's just the guy you whoop whenever you see him crop up.
I'll bury the world in my sweet collectibles.
How many times do we have to teach you this lesson, old man?
It's not even all that absurdly surprising when he crops up. Metal Face, you have no idea how he found you. Maybe it was told to him by Zord or something, or maybe he's genuinely scouring the Bionis just because he's intent on destroying you. Prison Island, he's there to kill Zanza to keep the Monado getting powered up. What odds you were there at the same time? Even when the heroes now have the power to defeat him, that gets turned on its head when he turns the next encounter into a hostage situation, putting control back in his own hands. He's here to make the journey excruciatingly hard and ridden with sacrifice for our heroes, and he has his methods to keep the control in his hands. Moebius DJ, on the other hand, while they're by chance the first time by having a common target with the heroes, the other encounters don't share much in common with that. Yorin's here to screw with them because he knew they were going to be there and wanted a chance to screw with them. Then same with Moebius DJ at the Annihilator. How did they know? Oh, they're getting tracked with their iris. The villains know where they are at all times, for free. Even when this problem is seemingly solved, just kidding, no it's not. Mio is half Moebius now, which apparently means they always know where she is, because Zed microchipped all Moebius or something, I guess. How very convenient.
I don't get your surprise. That one's still half Moebius.
This isn't some villain hunting you down. They just kind of go where you are when they feel like it. Because they always know where you are. You're being tracked. Combine this with the fact that they're not at all a threat, and I just couldn't really find myself caring. Moebius DJ is such a stark contrast to a villain like Metal Face, who makes it blatantly evident what a threat he is to you to the point that it seems like an impossible task to defeat him, and who takes joy in hunting you down with the goal of ending your journey, who won't hesitate to bring genuine risk to our heroes at their most vulnerable times.
And I got a good memory. Fiora, get out of there! Get out! Screams were music to my ears. My claws slid right through her soft flesh, like a hot knife through butter.
The other half of DJ, however, Moebius J, Yorin. This is where things get a bit more interesting. Yorin's the guy who's always lagging behind, but genuinely trying his best. He wants to support his friends, to the point that he's willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. Before we really delve into him though, I do have to criticize this sacrifice scene. Lance and Jerk Kid are stuck under this beam, and a water tower above is looking unstable. You can't go back to save them because that tower could fall any second now. But Yorin runs in and starts trying to save them, which spurs the other heroes to help out, which frees Lance and Jerk Kid. So now you'd expect them to run away from the water tower danger area, right? Right? Nope. Instead, they talk and talk and talk some more.
You hurt? Can you run?
Yeah, more or less. Urine? Why? We should go. Yeah.
And then, oh no, the water tower falls! Now Yorn has to sacrifice himself to save Lance. They really couldn't have just had the heroes running immediately after saving these two. Water tower starts falling, and Yorn and Lance aren't able to make it far enough away in time, so Yorn has to sacrifice himself. They really had to sit around the campfire and sing their campfire song for a while. Anyway, Yorn sacrifices himself in one of the most nonsensical sacrifice scenes I've ever seen. So now all of a sudden he's back as one of the baddies and being all evil. Surely this isn't truly Yorn. Surely this is a version of him that got all corrupted and evil just to be a familiar face that stands against the heroes, right? The fascinating twist here is not that we're facing some evil version of Yorn, but rather that we're just facing Yorn, the same character we knew him as. This is who he's always been, just in a position he never had the opportunity to be in before. He wanted to be like his friends, that were excelling with the talent they had, metaphorically soaring high above. He was the underdog who, no matter how hard he tried, it was like he couldn't do anything right. And even when he gives it his best to do something meaningful to someone important to him to make them proud, all he gets is scolded. This desperation for recognition eventually leads to Yorn's life being traded for Lance's, having finally done something meaningful for someone he looked up to. This action is interpreted in two ways. Yorn begins to see it as the moment he rose above his friends, literally in the sense of becoming a powerful Moebius, and metaphorically in the sense of being able to make such a sacrifice that surely these friends who were never grateful could never achieve. It was an action that surely would go without recognition, as all his previous attempts at pulling his weight were, and yet he went through with it, and rose above them. The other interpretation was that this was the moment he soared like the birds he looked up to among his allies being these incredibly strong figures whose strength could never be reached. This isn't the case. Lance being ungrateful for his actions as he seemingly always was? Untrue. It shaped him into who he became, and Yorn's death continued to haunt him throughout the plot. Yorn learns that he put up his allies on an unjustifiable metaphorical pillar above himself, and that his actions did have true positive consequences, even if he didn't realize it before. And so, rather than following orders of the one who gives him the chance to strike back against his former friends, he instead comes to his own decision. Before, he sacrificed himself in pursuit of the recognition he so desperately desired, but this time he sacrifices himself because he knows the lasting impact it's going to have on the lives of his friends. Unlike D, Yorn doesn't stand against the heroes as an antagonist for the sake of having a convenient antagonist shoehorned into Metalface's place, but rather as a natural consequence of who his character truly was all along, and his own interpretation of his role in life. So Yorn is a far stronger character than D. Also, evil, irredeemable D is set up to be the perfect villain for Yorn to turn against, since D just so happens to be a dick. Right as the one villain has his doubts and chance at redemption, another villain starts to bully him, which gives him that final push to be defiant. Talk about typical.
I can't crush these fools if you hold your strength back. Give it to me, you no-good deadweight loser.
Deadweight loser?
Who else, kiddo? So give it up. Go on, give!
I'm still waiting for the day a villain in that role instead takes a stance of, no, we're your family now. We care about you. Remember what those heroes did to you? Instead of being like, oh, you're having doubts and thinking about switching sides? Here's more reason for you to do so. It's time for you to be redeemed in the story by defeating me because I'm a dick. The moment Yorn started having his doubts, you could sniff out from a mile away that D was about to start bullying him. And on the topic of characters with connections to the heroes turned to the bad guys of Moebius, let's transition into the next character I want to talk about. An artist turned vivid red, Shania. Creative chapter name, right? Because she's an artist and whatever. Shania within the main plot alone I found to be severely lacking. She was an Ouroboros candidate, tried to mimic Gondor and failed. Something Gondor wasn't exactly all that happy about, and then bam, traitor. Well, that's rather convenient, isn't it? She's not really much of a character. That is, unless you complete Senna's side story, which barely even has much focus on Senna. I mean, it focuses more on her than any of the other 5 main characters, but it feels like the main focus here is on Shania and Gondor. We learn that Shania comes from a prestigious house with high standards. Everybody in her family's always been at the top, so if she's 8th best and in the backup reserves rather than main force, even if it was competing against 100 others, In her mother's eyes, she still may as well have been last for bringing disgrace to her family's name. She had an older sister, who, after she passed away, it was suddenly like Shania had to rise to the role that was suddenly, unexpectedly put on her shoulders as the representative of her house. She has her own talents, art. It's recognized and encouraged by Gondor, and her father wants her to pursue what she's passionate about rather than what she feels people expect her to be. But her mother, on the other hand, expects her to be her sister and her ancestors rather than herself. She tries to be her sister, and that doesn't work. Her mother puts this Gondor figure up on this high pedestal while berating her own daughter. So Shania tries to be Gondor, which also ends in failure. Gondor believes that Shania shouldn't be trying to mimic her and should try to just be herself, but isn't exactly very eloquent with words and just kind of gives Shania a lot of crap for her mimicry. She has incredible talent being herself, but she's seemingly not allowed to do that after her sister's passing. Now she has to be her sister. She's not good enough. Her mother wants her to be Gondor. She's even worse at being that, and it's like no matter what she tries, this world isn't going to be happy with her. This breaks her. She genuinely believes she'd be better off as part of the cycle of 10-year terms and constant war over and over across lifetimes, because she wants a place in this world. While her initial plan is to become part of the cycle, she's also given the option to instead become Moebius, which she accepts. She calls it incredible, claiming, "I have control," something that she felt was impossible in her life. It's only on being defeated that she's given the chance to reflect on how she was wanted as being herself, rather than being one of these iconic models. I find it interesting how this scene with her father, in terms of where we actually see it in the story here, is only as Shania reflects on it in her final moments. He had never been around during the scenes before this point that had turned her down this path. I think that speaks to how it can be so easy to dwell on the negative feelings, like the world's against you, and forget about the positive in the world until it's too late. The final dialogue between Shania and Gondor I feel is meant to make the argument of the importance of being proud of who you are, rather than shaping yourself the way you believe others expect you to be. Another detail that I cannot help but notice on rewatching the cutscenes and looking deeper into things is that the weapon that Shania draws during the events of Chapter 6 is her sister's gun, what she uses to take her life and start anew. There had been those in her life who've told her to put down the gun, put down the weight of all those expectations, and instead pick up her own passions. Stop trying to be her sister, and instead be herself. But the weight of these expectations was too much, drowned out the other voices that pointed her towards becoming herself, and ultimately were the thing that had her decide on the new darker path her life would take, believing that she had no choice in the matter. I honestly thought Shania was a pretty good character, but you only find out she's a good character if you do optional side content. But now, how about character backstory and stakes? Something I've always found fascinating throughout this trilogy was Xenoblade's way of giving each character personal stakes in the story being told. They each have their own unique reason for being here on this journey, and their own connections to the plotline. Take Xenoblade 1 for example. Shulk sets out for revenge against the Mechon, and has a personal connection to Fiora and Dixon, and I guess Sansa you could argue, and also Metalface is the figure that he wants revenge on. Ryan sets out as Shulk's best friend, who's always there to have his back, and also has a personal connection with Dunban. Sharla sets out also for revenge in a way, along with wanting to help support the heroes who helped her, and to defeat the Mechon, and has a personal connection to Gatto. Dunban sets out to rise to the role of hero, using every bit of his power to do what's right and protect the weak, and has a personal connection to Mumkar, Dixon, Fiora, and Shulk. And I guess Ryan too you could argue, but this isn't like a super strong, important thing to the plot. Melia sets out to represent the High Entia in the story, inspire her brethren to join the fray, get revenge on Metalface for the death of her father, and hoping she can smash a Monado boy, with her personal connections being Callian, Lorthia, and the High Entia in general. Ricky sets out because it's his role as Hero Pawn, and serves as representative of the Nupon race. Fiora joins the heroes after being saved, wanting to set the world right as Mayneth would want and help to protect her friends, and has a personal connection to Mayneth, who in turn has a personal connection to Egil and Zanza. Each has their own reasons for being part of this journey, and many of the key villains has some sort of personal connection to at least one of the heroes, if not more. In Xenoblade Chronicles 3, however, I feel like we don't really see that kind of thing. Everyone has the same general backstory as a soldier who was raised to fight until death, and they set out to survive and defeat the true enemy after becoming Ouroboros. Rather than a party motivated by individual personalities and goals, they set out because of the goal of the group. Survive, find the truth, defeat true enemy. The reason it ended up this way is mostly just as a consequence of the type of story being told. This is a world where people are born anew after death and live up to 10 years in another go at the endless war over and over again. They're designed to be soldiers who don't have individuality, normal worldly desires, or even social norms as we know them. This is a system meant to discourage individuality and spur everyone en masse towards battle as the only way they understand life. This is further exemplified by the age of everyone in the cycle. From my understanding, being born at roughly the age of 10 and living up until roughly the age of 20. Old enough to contribute to the war effort, but not old enough to question the system and the world, for most at least. The characters are stripped of individuality and personal stakes they'd otherwise be able to have in the story being told, not because of poor writing, but rather as a consequence of the type of story being told. It's the world that stripped their chance to have unique backstories and connections in the story. As a result, though, I couldn't find myself as invested in each of the characters' goals moving forward as I could with the previous two titles. It is nice to have a different kind of story than before, but this is one of the key consequences of writing this specific kind of story. However, despite the limitation, the writers still tried to at least give each character some connection to other characters in the plot being told. Noah and Mio, most obviously with N and M, the side of them that symbolized regret. Noah had a connection with Chris. Mio's connection was with Miyabi. Uni's connection was with Moebius D. Taion with Nimue and Isert. Lan's with Yoren, who's honestly connected to all the Keva's characters, but Lan's the most by far. And Senna with, well, nobody, really. So to make up for this, the writers created a new connection between her and Shania that would kind of awkwardly unfold during the plot, attempting to compare and contrast how they both sought approval and had people they looked up to. But most of these aren't long-term. Xenoblade 1 villains with some sort of connection to the heroes, Metalface, Fiora, Egil, Dixon, arguably Lorithia, and arguably Zanza, all have some sort of long-term connection that's touched on throughout the course of the plot. Kato is pretty short-term, brought up early as Charla's got a boyfriend who probably died, and he just shows up to stop them later, and it's not too long before he dies protecting the heroes and that plotline's done. Not like it's a particularly bad thing for it to be that sudden. Wouldn't want to have it be present throughout the course of the plot if it meant taking away from other characters that the plot wanted to focus on. The problem with 3 is that most of these connections are pretty short-term and hold very little meaning to the overall plot, if at all. Chris and Noah. Chris comes back as a Moebius, even though he wasn't somebody that the world had twisted into a villain, as had been the case for many other Moebius. He comes back as a Moebius because he wants to test Noah. Chris is one of the level-headed characters who supports the heroes. Wouldn't he want to add his strength to the party? Obviously it's fair game considering Triton did it. Nah, he wants to test Noah, just for the sake of having another foe with a connection to the heroes. He only shows up out of nowhere for Noah's side story. You face him and he's like, wow, you've got a pretty sick beat, and then he dies. Mio and Miyabi. It comes up a couple times in regards to her off-seeing flute, but is similar to Chris in that she just kind of shows up for Mio's side story.
It's free real estate.
They have an epic flute battle, and then I guess that's resolved, and like almost every other 7th party member, is almost certainly never going to be seen or spoken of again for the rest of the plot. Uni and D. It takes her a little while to piece together what it was that had happened, finding out that D had killed her in a previous life. But when you encounter D for the first time since his revelation that there's a connection here, it seems like something that'll take a decent while in the plot to work past, right? Nope, just resolved immediately, and then this plotline is never brought up again. That sure was easy. Taion, his stuff is touched on towards the end of chapter 3, and then just never again unless you play his side story, which will handle the rest. Senna and how the plot compares her to Shania. It's around for a bit at the end of chapter 5 and beginning of 6, and that's it for the main story. It's touched on a bit in Senna's side story, but it honestly takes a back seat to Shania and Gondor. Senna's side story. Yeah, top 10 lies in video game history, huh? Lance and Yorn, however, this is the only one that I felt had a strong presence throughout the plot. For the most part, at least. There were times I felt like this plotline should have been furthered when it wasn't. For example, the Moebius DJ battle for the Kevis Annihilator. Yorn is faced by our heroes only 3 times in the plot, so you'd think the second battle would be a key point to further this plotline, but instead it's not furthered at all. Why? Because this encounter needs to be used to completely resolve Uni's plotline in one fell swoop instead. Xenoblade loves to focus on its one-on-one character interactions, but now, when you have an interlinked villain that essentially means you're facing 2 at once, well, one is going to have to take the back seat if the game really wants to focus on one. At the Annihilator is where Uni's plotline gets resolved, and at the Cloud Keep is where Lanz's plotline gets resolved, without any real trace of the other plotline being furthered in the other scenario's counterpart. At the end of the day, I did enjoy the characters' distinct personalities, their own hopes and fears that drove them, and the character designs themselves, but their own backstories couldn't be that varied as a result of the story being told, and the goal to be reached felt like the goal of the group rather than of individuals coming together under a common cause. And while the writers attempted to give each of the characters some sort of personal connection to the story being told, these typically aren't connections that are developed throughout the plot. Simply, here it is brought up, oh, now it's resolved, I guess. It made it difficult to feel like each of these characters as individuals had strong connections to the story they existed in comparison to the previous Xenoblade titles. And now, how about that convenience and those plot holes? Xenoblade Chronicles 3 had a lot of times I felt like things worked out way too conveniently, working the way they did simply because that's where the story needed to go, not as a natural consequence of the hero's actions. I touched on this a bit during the discussion on the level of threat, such as how you're suddenly stronger than N after being stuck in a cell for the past month, or how Moebius DJ is always conveniently just as strong as the plot always needs him to be, but there were other moments that made me scratch my head and just go, really? Take the battle against Colony Lambda, for example. Taion is toying with the fake Izzard without any issues. The Pharaonis can fire out an insane amount of lasers in all directions, and Taion's at no risk of getting hit. It's no problem. But then after he goes rock, just kidding, paper, he just kind of stops and stands still. So Izzard is like, alright, this'll stop you, as he charges up some mega laser that clearly can only be fired in a straight line forward. So Senna needs to rush to the rescue and become Ouroboros to save Taion. Oh, wait, really? He just got through the insane onslaught of lasers without a scratch, and yet somehow this mega laser that's going to fire in this one very specific and very telegraphed direction is something that's a serious threat to him? I mean, he's just standing there waiting for the thing to kill him. Clearly, he's never played Breath of the Wild to know you can dodge this kind of attack by just doing literally anything but standing still. Why is this a threat to Taion? Because it needs to be to give Senna a reason to become Ouroboros, obviously. How very convenient. Oh no, this interlinked Moebius is going to blow up. Let's stab the ground so the cliff collapses beneath them, because that's surely much safer than just running the heck away. Moebius M's unique power is manipulating consciousness. Well, that's certainly convenient so she and Mio can do the one exact thing they need to do to save Mio. Also, these Moebius unique abilities are used so seldom in the main story. And the side quest consoles rarely had unique abilities too, as far as I remember, but I'm focusing on the main story here. The Colony 4 console. Did he have a unique ability? Is the Flame Clock healing something unique? I was under the impression at least that it was a general Moebius thing. Yorn can make mud puppets he can control. He does this a whole one time when we first meet him, and then he never does it again for the entire rest of the game. Console D can sense the air around him or whatever, which he uses a whole one time at the Kevis Annihilator. He reveals it, Uni works around it, and then it's never used again. Console N. Does he even have a unique thing? Is his anime super speed his exclusive skill? And Console M can manipulate consciousness as she pleases. Also, later on in the story, I think Console Y can get his mind-controlled victims to play music to make the other people he's already mind-controlling be even more mind-controlled, enhance their abilities in some way. I have no idea. It really just seems like it's just an excuse for Mio to have a flute battle with Miyabi. You can remove every unique Moebius ability except for M's, and it will make zero impact on the plot. Because M had the exact ability she needed for Mio to live, and how unused and forgettable every other unique Moebius ability is, I'm convinced the only reason Moebius have unique abilities at all is so that M's ability feels less bullshit and out of nowhere. It doesn't feel as much like a plot convenience if everybody has some crazy power going for them, right? Even though it really doesn't feel like that because none are used in the plots except for hers. What it is an excuse.
And when everyone's super, no one will be.
Nobody's been to Origin before because of the raging storm around it. Sure is handy that this Nuppon just so happens to have been working on finalizing a design that can get through it, not only during the lifetime of the heroes, but right at the moment they need it. How does Noah face Zed life after life if there has never been a way to break into Origin before? And Zed established himself in this adventure as someone who never really leaves his home theater. Did he used to actually leave to fight the heroes? And at the convenience of the heroes' schedules, I suppose, because he comes and fights them before Mio's time runs out. And it's only as of the events of the game that he now decides to become a shut-in? Why? What? How is it that Mio is always older than Noah anyway, if they consistently die simultaneously? Wouldn't they respawn at the same time? Do Zed and Moebius consistently delay Noah? And at least some of the time his friends too, to keep them in sync, from respawning earlier just so that they can always keep them at a consistent age gap to Mio's respawn time? Why? For what purpose? Moebius never really hunt down the heroes, never work together with more than 2 of them, and even that's pretty rare. And the heroes usually only face them whenever they start interfering in that specific Moebius colony. X apparently randomly has a staff that cancels the party's Ouroboros forms, which is never explained past Zed gave it to her.
What are you...
What's that? It doesn't work anymore now that it's a situation the heroes need to come out on top? What a stroke of luck! I suppose you could make the argument it's because Noah has a new resolve, or Mio's half Moebius, or something, but still. It's never given an explanation. The Melia robot malfunctions just before killing you? Well, that's handy. There's lucky events like the Telethia saving you from Metalface in Xenoblade Chronicles 1, or the city bailing you out shortly after in this scene, but these events are set in motion by other characters in the story. But the Melia robot? I guess it was just designed by Tesla. It breaks and leans right. It's explained later that Melia could see through the eyes of the robot, and implied that she had a hand in it malfunctioning. But then, that just means the robot is poorly designed if she's able to get it to malfunction like that. That's convenient. This freaking scene.
Sorry, I don't think so. You'll have to do something about me first.
Wait, what did he even do? They're one figure, it's impossible to tell. I thought this was just Moebius D in control. I feel like this isn't as much of Yorn doing something, as much as it's just an obligatory reminder that Yorn is here because you'd forget otherwise. You can undo the Moebius brainwashing by just laying down an imposing sick beat, and the newly revived brainwashed group who are set against the heroes just so happen to be all people they know. That's handy, isn't it? D missed Nia's heart and she's able to regenerate? Well, that's lucky, isn't it? I mean, anybody who's played Xenoblade 2 knows Nia's able to mess around with cells however she likes, like that time she made Malos dummy thick. So, there was no way this was going to kill her. But is the fake out that the queen has seemingly been killed really necessary? When N destroys the previous city, I guess there's enough survivors still to make a new city? Wasn't he ordered to kill them all? The high role that Yorn wanted to rise to one day just so happened to be the attainable villain role he ends up getting, something he couldn't possibly have known was possible during his life. And aren't regular people supposed to have little to no idea who the consuls are?
That's what I want to end up like, someday.
The baddies can track the heroes with their iris built into their eye? Well, that's certainly convenient. Also convenient, they didn't bother to actually pursue you from their tracking until this moment, since they don't seem to care much about actively working against you. Oh, but you can block the tracking with these eye patches. Well, that's certainly convenient. Oh, just kidding. They can actually still track you because Mio's half Moebius. Well, that's certainly convenient. And wait, if it's established they can still be tracked because of Mio being half Moebius from Chapter 6 on, then why do they continue to wear eye patches sometimes? The heroes can just sneak into prison and the guards have no idea who they are as long as they don't go into Ouroboros forms? But wait, didn't they take off their eye patches? Which means the baddies should know they're in prison? Well, I guess they do, considering their ambush during the escape sequence. No joke, this is my favorite absurd plot detail of the game. The bad guys found out the heroes were in prison, so they waited until the heroes escaped from prison so that they could capture them and throw them in prison. Which also means Gondor is able to escape with the key to the Queen of Agnes, which could have been completely avoided had they just left the heroes locked in prison. Fantastic writing. But this is the plot hole that bothers me the most. Those who die during a homecoming actually die for good. This is a rule the game needs to establish to give weight to Mio seemingly being about to die. However, this rule goes completely against the whole idea of this world, the endless now. Don't you need this cycle where everyone continues to respawn and fight one another so the cycle never ends? It's said that soldiers very rarely survive until their homecoming, but the fact that it's a possibility means it's going to be happening sometimes, which means that even though it's slow, the total pool of soldiers will decrease with time, which therefore means that the endless now is not an endless now. Eventually, the day would, in theory, come that every soldier has their homecoming, and the world dies. Is this what Noah meant at the beginning of the game when he said the world was dying? Because the game never really clarifies that as far as I'm aware. Well, what about the people from the city? They're continuing to reproduce by normal means, and Shania proves to us that the city folk can be booted into the system, so surely the captured city folk will be booted into the system to replace the depleted soldiers, right? This would also serve as a potential stance that anti-war city folk could take, making the argument, we need to isolate and stop giving them fodder. The system will slowly die out on its own if we just leave it be. Nope, captured city folk are instead imprisoned and executed from time to time. Don't Zed and Moebius desire the endless now? Heck, you wanna know how especially stupid this is? We see at the beginning of Chapter 6 in the Memories of Previous Lives that Noah and Mio have just straight up run out of time on their 10-year clocks before. They weren't killed in battle in this lifetime or anything. They both managed to survive the full 10 years and fade away at the end. They still respawn. This means that the requirement to be dead isn't to survive 10 years. No, it's specifically to undergo the homecoming ceremony in front of the Robo Queen at the end of your 10 years. Something that's completely orchestrated by Moebius. This means that the endless now isn't endless and will slowly die as a direct consequence of the actions of those we're supposed to believe want to perpetuate the endless now. So, the ones that want to perpetuate the endless now are also the ones responsible for slowly ending the endless now. Heh. This is a clear contradiction. Why? Oh, I know. Because it's exactly the rule the plot conveniently needs to give weight to the emotional scene, even if it sacrifices the logic of one of the key premises of the story, without making any effort to incorporate this shoehorned rule in a meaningful way. Well, fine. Even if it doesn't make sense, at least we've established that this is a rule. Surely the story is going to remain consistent to its own rules, and M is truly dead and— oh, come on! Pulled out of the writer's asses again for another emotional sacrifice scene. We've had our first emotional sacrifice of this character, but what about the second? Eventually, I could just not take this story seriously anymore. Things weren't happening because it was a natural consequence of the hero's actions, but rather because this is the way the plot had to go. So, it's the way it's going to go, no matter how much rewriting of the rules was needed. There are a lot of things I really loved about this story, but it genuinely had to be one of the most convenient stories I think I've ever seen. The fear of moving toward the future, Moebius. The previous titles in this story have always faced an antagonist who's a person, Xenoblade 1 being half the soul of the scientist who brought about the recreation of the world, and Xenoblade 2 being the AI Malos who was overtaken by the feelings and desires of Amalthus and interpreted destruction as his role. In Xenoblade Chronicles 3, however, it's not an actual person we face, but an emotion, a fear, a desire to persist in the endless now. The game says that there's a little Moebius in us all, and that this collective fear gave rise to Zed and Moebius, creating the endless now. What if Origin failed and the worlds were doomed to destroy each other for good? What if there's no coming back? What if the future is some dark outcome? These are the fears that are meant to have given rise to Moebius, who hijacked Origin and used it to create the endless now, freezing the two worlds in a singular point in time where the two worlds persist together rather than destroying each other, most of the time. Why this endless now needed to be one in which the two sides are at war and living out these 10-year terms over and over again instead of some world where everything is peaceful and chill? Well, maybe that part I'll attribute as another plot convenience, or maybe I didn't turbo-analyze the plot enough to make it somehow make sense. The Moebius really couldn't have just been like, yeah, we fear moving toward the future. We want everything frozen in the endless now, just be safe. Let's all just live a chill, peaceful life together. The story excuse, as far as I could tell, is that the Moebius need life to continue existing, and that's about all the information we get in regards to that. I do wish it could have been delved into a bit deeper, even just something like, yeah, keeping the world frozen, that cost sure isn't cheap, and needs to feed off of human lives. Anyway, the Moebius don't see the world as all that bad. These people are given the luxury of persisting in an endless now, which can be a very appealing idea, especially when you worry about what it is you have to lose if you keep moving towards the future. By having a villain who's a symbol or idea rather than a person, Xenoblade 3 uses this to make arguments, with the key takeaway from its story being to not fear moving toward the future. The game argues that the future can be uncertain, but that shouldn't stop you from moving towards the future. In the last video essay on the hidden treasure of Area Zero, I shared the story of my Taekwondo journey and how I felt it related to the arguments the game made through Kieran. Because I already shared that story, I won't bother going through the full thing again, but the short version is I spent 5 years being stumped on testing for my 3rd degree black belt, and it felt like I was going to be stuck on that challenge forever. Part of me fearful about the prospect of attempting to rise to the challenge, being more content at times struggling in this endless now, but eventually mustering the determination to keep moving forward. Life is sometimes going to throw incredibly daunting challenges your way you never expected, and it can be scary, worrying, or intimidating. What if I fail? What if I'm not good enough? It can feel a lot better not to face up to it, to continue to persist in the endless now without striving for improvement. Blame other external factors for your own lack of resolve. But the only way we're going to better ourselves, to drag ourselves out of these conditions we don't want to live in, is to strengthen your resolve and see it through. Even if that means you have to try over and over and over, and even if it has some scary potential consequences, you'll eventually be able to pursue the future in a way that you can be proud of and make a better world. Maybe the now is worth protecting. It's something important to you or others around you, but at the same time it shouldn't come at the cost of the future. I always enjoy when stories have some sort of deeper meaning and symbolism, and different ways that you can interpret the narrative and the meaning behind it, and that's something I can praise Xenoblade Chronicles 3 for. Now, how about character emotions, convictions? Xenoblade's well known for its character writing, and so much of the time the characters aren't afraid to get emotional. But Noah, I had a hard time feeling that with sometimes. He doesn't really feel like he's driven by emotion, but rather a much more matter-of-fact doing what needs to be done. Even when in the most dire of battles, he doesn't wear his emotions on his sleeve anywhere near the same degree as Shulk or Rex.
I'll kill you! Talk all you want, because those words will be your last! You will know the pain and suffering you caused the Emperor and Fiora! Stop this! Callian and the others are still on the sword! Our friends are going to die! Stop!
You bloody psychopath!
Van Damme!
Stop attacking! Uni! Lance!
You must be fucking joking!
If we let up now, he'll take us down.
But our friends from Colony 4!
We know that he is capable of getting emotional, and that the voice actor can do a stellar job at it.
Mio! Why would you do this to me? You said you'd be by my side! Mio! All I did for you!
Once again, perhaps it's just another consequence of the kind of story being told. He's not somebody who was living a peaceful life that he enjoyed before being thrust into a journey he never asked for that's going to be filled with a lot of sacrifice and strife. Rather, he's a battle-hardened soldier who's only known fighting all his life. He's not thrust into some journey that's going to be way harder than his current life, but rather given an out, a chance to survive, a chance to make change and go around liberating and befriending colonies around the world. Shulk has his hometown attacked and his childhood friend killed in front of his eyes. Rex was in the wrong place at the wrong time and has his childhood, him killed in front of his eyes, and is thrust into this unexpected journey. Noah, however, already has a hellish life, and is given an opportunity to change that. He's the only of our three heroes whose life genuinely gets drastically better at the onset of the adventure. You could make the argument that perhaps Rex's does as well, since he's all about this opportunity to be someone important, and a major part of his character arc is accepting that this story isn't about him, and that he failed to acknowledge Pyra and Mithra's feelings. Even so, Noah's is the only one whose life clearly gets better. Perhaps it's kinda sucky at first as previous comrades turn against the heroes, but this doesn't stay a concern for very long when Noah realizes that Lucky 7 will cut through flame clocks.
Like a hot knife through butter!
So perhaps the combination of his adventure making life better and him being a battle-hardened soldier, he doesn't get anywhere near as emotional as Shulk or Rex, and as a consequence, I couldn't find myself connecting with them to the same degree. Of the three protagonists, he felt the most generic. A lot of the time, he kind of felt like if Mark Zuckerberg was a Xenoblade protagonist.
Tomorrow, we'll finally reach the castle lands. I want us to be at our readiest. We should run one final check of everyone's equipment.
Fine for you, isn't it? All that time you've got. We keep taking this at such a casual pace. Now Sword March seems so distant.
Mia?
What am I even doing? I can't.
You still have 2 months left. If we take care of this now, we can ensure the colony's safety. Just maybe, we can make an ally of people in the castle. It'll make getting to Sword March a bit easier.
Still! It's 2 months. Might as well be nothing.
But you did agree to doing this.
Well, yeah, but I know I did, but
Look, I know it was a snap decision. I understand why you're upset. Let's just take it easy tonight. Take a moment to breathe.
why wouldn't I be upset? Take what easy? We rest today, and tomorrow, before I know it, it'll be time. And then I'll be...
I mean, I get that, but we...
You don't get it! Not at all!
What the spark?
He sees things analytically, and has a hard time understanding the emotions of others. I believe the only time we see him get truly emotional is when he watches the screening of Mio Homecoming. When we saw Shulk and Rex get truly emotional about the one most important to them, we had the entire game up to this point build up to that. We understand why they feel the way they do. Everything we've seen so far has led up to this. With Noah, however, we have some hints about his true feelings towards Mio, but we don't know their full extent for certain until he's locked up in prison. Maybe he himself didn't understand the full extent of his feelings until then. But it's only after Moebius snaps away half the Mios in the universe that we get to see the full extent of why Noah feels the way he does. That these two have fought against Moebius time and time again, failed in their efforts, and even tried to run before. This is even hinted at earlier in the game, but we don't understand the full extent of this until after the cat gets banished to the Shadow Realm. I feel like this scene could have been a lot more impactful had we already known everything that led up to this point, instead of only being told it after the time where knowing it would have evoked the strongest emotional response. Of course, it might not make as much sense from a timeline perspective, as Mio shows this to Noah after M says peace out Girl Scout and tests him to see if he's willing to pursue this path, even if it means he's alone. But it feels very much like the plot makes you wonder, are Noah and Mio that important to each other at this point? There's hints they may be, but nothing to know for sure. Oh, I guess they are, and this is supposed to be super emotional right now. How I would have solved this is to make Noah have dreams of some sort, or maybe flashbacks when he looks at N. It's established that characters can have lingering memories of previous lives if they felt strong emotions at the time of the memory. But the only time we see this used during the plot is with Uni's fear of Moebius D. You'd think that if Noah and Mio had been significant to each other lifetime after lifetime, that losing her is enough to consistently break him to the point that he loses all will to fight, that he's willing to abandon the fight if it means being together, that he's willing to become the monster he sought to destroy if it means not having to go through the pain of losing her again. That present him would feel something here, that he'd have some sort of lingering memory that pushes him a certain way. It never comes up in his mind as scenes he doesn't understand and needs to find answers to like it does with Uni. Had some of these scenes come up in his mind, perhaps while dreaming, then he'd be like, who truly is Mio, and who is she to me? I don't understand, but all I know is that I have to protect her. Or the other idea, headaches with Consul N. If seeing him is going to mess with his head so much, it should dredge up some of these locked away memories of previous lives. Tell Noah that this guy has some sort of connection with his past, instead of just, this is the guy who somehow gives him headaches when he looks at him. Rather than the writers establishing that there's a connection between Noah and N because it unlocks some memories kept deep inside themselves, the writers establish that there's a connection between Noah and N because N's the guy that gives Noah headaches. This had so much untapped potential. Noah doesn't portray extreme emotions a whole lot unless it's exactly when he needs to, but this is a stark contrast to his counterpart, Mio. Mio, on the other hand, gets very emotional. She's like the Shulker Rex in this game when it comes to displaying her emotions. And she should be just as much of a battle-hardened soldier as Noah, but she's the one who's a lot more human, while Noah's the one who's a lot more robotic. She's our character who's really got it rough, with seemingly only a couple months to live, and the stress and fear of it torments her. Sure, it would be nice if Noah could actually recognize and show compassion for that fear instead of just being the pressing forward analytical machine that he is. So I honestly didn't find myself all that connected to our flagship main protagonist in this story, but rather found myself much more invested in our secondary protagonist, Mio. The other 5 are given a chance to live longer and shape change in the world, but Mio's not afforded the same opportunity. She's still stuck dealing with the stress of being at the end of her life. She doesn't feel like she has anybody that she can truly open up to about how she feels about it. And when she tries to with Noah, she's just shot down. She's seemingly got the weight of the world on her shoulders, with only so long left to make a change, and so it frustrates her with how messed up the world is. So when it comes to our 2 main heroes of Noah and Mio, I really liked the way they handled Mio, but couldn't really connect with Noah to the same degree due to how seldom he really showed emotion, even in comparison to the rest of the cast. And while he's the one in the plot who gets the most emotional moment, he's not afforded the opportunity to show emotion throughout the plot like Mio does.
Mio?
Stop!
Stop?
Stop toying with everyone's lives! What did they ever do to you? Why? All they wanted was their wish to be realized. You turned everything into a game, cast them away like dolls. These are our lives here. They're not some toys you can just play with.
Noah, you better not stop us!
Oh, believe me, I won't. You make me laugh. Us, half-assed. Our conviction has never been stronger. And now, we will show no mercy. By Ethel and Kamaravi's lives, I swear! I'll make you pay!
You're full of shit! You never tried, you're just a coward!
What did you? If you meant it, you'd have found a way, but you didn't even try to make the effort! Did you? So what do you know of the world and of life?
When it comes to Noah and Mia, however, I feel like I can't talk about them without also talking about their counterparts. So, taking a different path, N and M. I've seen many games before where the narrative will draw parallels between the hero and villain, one of the strongest examples being Tales of Arise. Alphen and Volaron went through a similar experience, but the big difference between them being that Alphen had friends he cared about, those who could support him, and who he could use his powers to protect. Meanwhile, this is something Volaron lacked, and he was shaped into a villain. Had Alphen not had the network he did, could this have been another similar path he could have taken? These are two different outcomes from a similar situation, two sides of the same coin. I find it fascinating to draw parallels between the hero and villain, and to show our hero as an imperfect and very human being by showing another path they could have taken, rather than just being some flawless hero. Xenoblade Chronicles 3 takes this idea of parallels between hero and villain to another level, by straight up having another version of Noah and Mio as foes that you face. Doesn't get much more on the nose about drawing parallels than that. These two versions become symbolic, both figuratively and literally since the game just straight up says this is the case, with Noah and Mio representing hope and N and M representing regret.
What you've become is regret itself.
N was tormented by his sworn adversary, stalked and having the cat most precious to him taken away time after time. Mio became something he desired but could never keep, and it broke him. Hope for change eventually changed into regret for not having the one most precious to him, and his focus shifted from fighting Zed and Moebius over and over again to just doing whatever it took to be happy. Rather than fighting, let's start a family together despite it not being able to last. Rather than fighting, let's run off in dire conditions, even if it means almost no chance of survival. That became more appealing than continuing to fight and lose her. He became obsessed with the person he'd seemingly been denied time after time, and it draws parallels to a conversation between Amalthus and Zeke in Xenoblade 2.
As soon as people are denied something they desire, they try to take it by force.
Not everyone's like that.
Oh, some give up prematurely, but the feeling is there, I assure you.
This honestly is a pretty interesting aspect to the plot, and lets us consider another side to Noah. These two characters aren't so different after all. When Noah's asked if he'd take the same path of his other, he's like, I don't know, maybe, but I'll try not to. It would be pretty brutal being stalked and tormented lifetime after lifetime in an endless cycle, and we see this break Noah, not because of the novelty of essentially facing oneself in a plot, but just because he's human, that this would break anybody. He fully gives up and gives in, and we see our Noah needing to muster the mental strength to surpass this by vowing to press onward, even if it means needing to be alone, needing to sacrifice. By the end, that's exactly what needs to be done. He achieved his goal, and was left without the one he cared about the most as a result, something N couldn't have ever done without the side of him that is Hope reaching out his hand. This really was a cool way to handle character development. He didn't destroy his regret, but rather accepted it through the acceptance that he may have to walk this path alone. Even if this consequence doesn't exist in the short term since Mio's alright, it ultimately has to for the heroes to see their goals through. However, this aspect of N and M isn't perfect. For one, I would have liked to have seen another side of Mio. M, however, really isn't about this life that N has chosen, and yet we're supposed to believe that both of them symbolize regret? Does M just regret N's decision? She regrets on someone else's behalf? This is how I probably would have handled M. Not like this path at first, chastising N for his actions, but eventually grow to accept it, enjoy it, figure that this is the best outcome for things. At the onset of the game, she's almost fully embraced this life, the only hints of her holding on to some faint hope being holding on to the key to Nia, but currently without any desire to give it up. The heroes would encounter her several times throughout the plot, like a Metal Face or Moebius DJ type character. Shows some reluctance and second thoughts, but she's convinced herself that this is the path to take because this is the way it has to be. But eventually, through enough encounters with the party, she has a change of heart, and decides that Hope is still alive, and decides to sacrifice herself to save Mio. If I had to hazard a guess as to why they didn't do something like this, is because it'd be too similar to Yorin, maybe. M just kind of feels like another character who's exactly what she needs to be to keep the plot moving forward. So, M dies in Mio's body, and Mio's now in her body. Half Ouroboros, half Moebius, that's kinda cool. But then when Noah reaches out his hand to N to walk the path of hope once more, N vanishes and suddenly Noah becomes half Moebius, and it's like, oh, I guess that's a thing that can happen, I guess they're one being now. And then let's compare to Xenoblade Chronicles 1. At the end of that game, Alvis suddenly comes during the final boss, turning against Sansa and granting Shulk the true Monado. The plot had been building up to this for quite some time, with Alvis showing favoritism to Shulk, testing him to see if he's capable of becoming this world's new god, and granting him the power to do so when the time comes. Very first encounter, he teaches Shulk how to disable the mind reading of Zanza's Telethia. Zanza probably wouldn't have been too happy about that, I'd imagine. He teaches Shulk about the Monado, helping him better understand his power. Continues to grant Shulk the power of visions after Zanza leaves him, and gives him just the hints that he needs to realize that he has a fighting chance. When Alvis appears during the final boss, it's a big payoff. In Xenoblade Chronicles 3, N and M appearing to sacrifice themselves, while it's kinda out of nowhere, the plot wasn't really building up to this like Alvis's actions were in 1. Didn't M actually die? I thought the rule was if you died during a homecoming that you're dead for good. I guess you could say part of her stayed alive in her physical body that was granted to Mio. And then there's N, who just kind of vanishes on contact with Noah and then suddenly appears here again. It really feels like the rules of this story are just whatever the plot needs them to be at any given time. How I would have done it is say that M is actually dead, instead of saying, she sacrificed herself, JK, she's fine, JK, we just said that so that she can sacrifice herself for a second time. Instead, have it only be N. Rather than have him vanish on touching Noah, have him get up and say, I'll meet you at the final battle, and then off he skedaddles. Have him appear in the cutscenes in the fight against Zed, and then when the time comes to deal the final blow and make a sacrifice, have N be the one who steps forward. Have him talk about his fear of making a sacrifice, of being alone, thank the party for carrying on the hope he once had, and bam, defeated Zed, or something along those lines at least. Have him be somebody that feels more rooted in reality, rather than the ever-changing rules that Xenoblade Chronicles 3 seems to love so much. Which also, speaking of, how are there 2 instances of Noah and Mio? Like, when Yorin became a Moebius, there wasn't another normal Yorin that respawned. When Shania became a Moebius, there wasn't another normal Shania that respawned. Like, unless it's just off-camera and never touched on. Why is it that when Noah and Mio become Moebius, they also still respawn normally and there's 2 of them now? Like, what? Now, for a changed world and necessity of plot, the Xenoblade Chronicles trilogy has been a series of grand adventures that always have some sort of long-term change in their world by the end. We see the hero's journey unfold where by the end we return, but because of the journey, things are now different. In Xenoblade Chronicles 1, Shulk was successfully able to create a world without gods. The Bionis, Zanza, has been killed, his fallen corpse becoming the new home for the people of the world. Rather than every race, Homs, Hyentia, Nopon, and Machina living in their own separate bubbles of the world and barely knowing about each other, we now live in a world where everyone lives and prospers together. It's not just a return to the peace they once knew, but the creation of a much better world. Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the world is slowly dying after Amalthus is mucking about with core crystals, and countries need to worry about losing their titans and homes to the Cloud Sea and needing to find elsewhere to live, such as when Gormott were the unwilling victims of Mor Ardanian colonization, because Mor Ardain fears that they will soon be without a home and need somewhere else to live to survive. And we hear during the plot of wars being waged over land, not over greed or power, but out of necessity for somewhere to live. So by the end as we return, it's no longer to the world we once knew, but of the Titans coming together in a world devoid of the Cloud Sea, creating an everlasting mass of land people will be able to exist on without the fear of their titan dying and them losing their home. We return to a stronger world. But then we come to Xenoblade Chronicles 3, where the return at the end of this adventure is quite literally the cutscene we were in at the beginning of the game. The kids are running to Alchemoth for celebrations, time freezes as the worlds collide, and Origins starts up. The events of the game all take place in just a singular moment in frozen time. The party defeats Pokemon Z, and what's funny is that I wrote that joke way before Legends ZA got announced. Origin reboots, and here we are again. It is the most literal return ever seen in the series, and that I've ever seen in a story at all, honestly. It's not putting the world into a distinctively better state than it was right at the beginning, but rather just putting it back to the way that it was. There's no significant world growth here, unless you count the population's mentality growing in the sense of, they created Zed out of fear of the future, what if Origin fails, what if everything is destroyed, and they created the Endless Now, but they surpassed this fear and gained the determination to continue moving toward the future regardless of how it turns out. I suppose you could say people grew from this perspective, but then the question is, so what? The whole thing that people were meant to be fearful of was the collision of the worlds and total destruction as these worlds passed through each other. But this has happened now. It's seemingly a one-off, one and done. It's not like the people of these worlds are going to have to worry about this again, presumably. Even if the worlds turn this car around and headed on a collision course again, we now know that Origin works. You no longer have to be afraid of the outcome. So the whole moral of the story is to not be afraid of moving toward the future. But the whole thing the people of this world would have been afraid of moving towards has been conquered. There exists no possibility of facing this kind of threat again. Therefore, there exists no long-term reason for this growth. It doesn't set up the characters to be better than they once were, to live in a world better than it once was. The actions of this game genuinely do not matter. From the Endless Now back to time flowing, yes, the world has changed. But from the opening cutscene to the closing cutscene, nothing changed. Of course, the writers decide to throw in lines like "we'll meet again" and have the open ending where Noah hears the off-scene tune and vanishes faster than a modern Pokemon game's time in the spotlight before the next title, to leave it up to the player's imagination so you can believe there was a happier ending where they meet if it makes you feel better, even if it undermines the whole point of the plot of moving forward, even if it means needing to sacrifice. Well, maybe it makes up for it by having a plot that was absolutely necessary. In Xenoblade Chronicles 1, Zanza was created as a result of the actions of Klaus. He created a new world. With Galea, they became as gods, and together ruled over the new world. But he became lonely at the top, and while he became ingrained in Hom's culture, he felt like there wasn't anybody that really knew him. He existed on even footing with the other god of this world, Meyneth, Galea, but these two have been shown to not see eye to eye. So he decided to recreate the world yet again, create one where he remains known from the get-go and can pursue the friendship he so desires. We don't know it at the beginning of the game, but Shulk's already dead, possessed by Zanza, who's constantly pushing him in the direction of progressing his grand plan. The plot of Xenoblade 1 had to occur. It was a result of Klaus's actions and decisions, and Shulk and his friends got caught in it, as Shulk was the one Zanza chose as a kid, who could grow up as a worthy vessel to use as a means to an end. In Xenoblade Chronicles 2, the half of Klaus here strives to create a new cycle of life, which he does so with blades and titans. But as he sees the people of this world continue to wage war on one another, one of the things he despised about the old world he sought to replace, he decides that perhaps this was fate, that his plan was doomed from the start, that humanity was irredeemable. And so he takes inaction, decides to let the world play out however it ends up playing out, essentially creating a world without gods, the type of world that Shulk and his friends strived for in the first game. But his inaction due to a lack of faith in humanity gets reflected in some, most notably Amalthus. Malthus is quite devoted to the architect. He preaches his faith, strives to help others around him because he believes it's what the architect would want. But his experiences end up showing him the darkness of humanity again and again, even among those he had previously helped. He begins to question the architect. How could this benevolent creator allow such things to happen? And unless he wanted it to happen. Humanity to drive itself to ruin, destroy the world. This becomes Amalthus's new objective, as he believes it's what the architect would want, so he'll act on this will as an agent. He no longer helps people because he believes it's what the architect would want, but as a reminder for the way people are. This destructive desire gets reflected into the Aegis, Malos, when Amalthus awakens him. And now you've got an uber-powerful supercomputer with the ability to harness power from other dimensions by the way of the Conduit, who's hell-bent on destroying this world that he hates, albeit with some relatability, some humanity. He doesn't side with Jin because he believes he truly needs Jin for achieving his goal, but because
I'm the same as you.
The plot happens as a consequence of Klaus's actions, or rather, inaction, or, to be more specific, as a consequence of the nature of humanity. And so, we have one plot that cannot but happen due to a warped desire to change the world and escape loneliness, and one plot that cannot but happen due to the nature of humanity itself. And then there's Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Zed quite literally comes out of nowhere. Origin was starting up, but some people thought, oh no, what if it doesn't work and we all die? So poof, Zed gets pulled out of the writers' asses. Also, wait, how many people even were there aware of Origin and who could have this worry? Because the masses here sure don't seem worried for what's about to happen, implying they had no idea. The plot of Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 could not but happen as a result of the world the characters found themselves in. In Xenoblade Chronicles 3, the plot could have absolutely not happened. The worlds are on a collision course, Origin does its thing. Wow, so glad everything worked, roll credits. There's no reason to drastically improve the world, and the only change by the end, overcoming this fear of the worlds destroying each other, this is growth that doesn't even matter past this confined plot of the game. The only reason the plot exists is for the sake of having a plot here. It never needed to happen, and as such, it carries nowhere near the same amount of weight as the previous titles.
And if it has no necessity, carries no weight, and makes no change, it begs the question, what's the point?
And with the weight of all three of these titles, let's discuss that next in this next chapter, the weight of life. Xenoblade Chronicles 2 and 3 feature a drastic low point for our heroes I would like to compare. I like to draw a comparison between Xenoblade 2's Chapter 7 and Xenoblade 3's Chapter 6. In Xenoblade 2, Rex feels pretty on top of the world. With Pyra and Mithra's power, he can achieve his goal of saving the world. Nothing can stop him. But at the end of Chapter 6, that's all taken away from him when Jin overpowers the party to take the Aegis. He's already proven he's willing to kill the hero, and is about to do so again. But Pyra is able to draw out all her strength to control Mithra's artifice on her own, and threatens using it to cause her own destruction if Jin doesn't agree to take only her without killing her friends. He agrees, and Pyra is taken. Chapter 6 ends. Chapter 7 sees the party in shambles, at a loss for what to do now, and Rex especially is broken. He's not spending time with his allies. Instead, he's keeping to himself to sob. He was seemingly the most determined of them all, and his allies are eagerly awaiting him to emerge and give them their course of action as their leader, but when he eventually steps out, it's to give up and go home. After the cast speaks some sense into him, he finds his determination again, and sets out to save Pyra and Mithra by obtaining the true power of the Aegis. Chapter 7 is a journey to obtain this power from the hero's tomb, and a journey to save the Aegis. This entire chapter, you don't have Pyra and Mithra in your party until the very end. You've got dungeons to traverse, bosses to defeat in the form of the Atom clones, Malos, and Jin and Malos, all without the character who's probably your most powerful blade at this point in the game. It's not just the characters in this story who feel this absence, but you as the player, as you go through arguably the most difficult chapter in a first playthrough, being stripped of your most powerful asset, and needing to learn how to get by without relying on your big-titted crutches. It's not just a significant story beat, but a significant gameplay beat, which serves to increase the impact it's going to have on the player. In my Games as Art essay, I described how the artfulness of games is co-authored by the developer and the player, and this is a great instance of that. It's not just the handcrafted static cutscenes that show this difference, but the player feels the difference in their play of the game. It's a trial to overcome these challenges they're faced with without one of their most powerful tools. It's not just something you're told about in the story, but a change you feel in your play. In regards to Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Mio seemingly dies. N goes to behead Noah. Noah gets Dreamscape exposition, and then Mio reveals she's alive and well, all within the span of about 10 minutes and with no gameplay, unless you count pressing forward on the left stick a few times. The story presents a drastic change that's going to have a major impact on our cast, but instead of really exploring that impact like we saw in Xenoblade 2, and forcing the player to feel the change that consequence makes, it's immediately solved moments later. It would have been fascinating to see Noah need to get by without Mio, no longer being able to become Ouroboros himself for a time, but eventually prove and show he's capable of moving towards the future even if he's alone, instead of just directly telling the audience that he's willing to move towards the future even if he's alone. Rex's growth was going from wanting to save the world and be the hero, to wanting to do right by Pyra and Mithra, give the support deserved to the ones he owes his very life, truly understand them and become the Aegis's true driver, something Adam never could. Noah's growth was going from wanting to live a longer life with those he cares about, to wanting to move toward the future, even if it means he has to be alone. But while Xenoblade Chronicles 2 shows you this, Xenoblade 3 just tells you. To be fair, we do see Noah's convictions of wanting to protect the now explored. I think the scene showing his and N's backstory is really powerful, and it helps you really understand why N felt so forced down the path he did. What isn't explored enough is why Noah is willing to move toward the future alone, while N is not. Because even though Noah is supposedly willing to move forward even if he's alone, we never actually see him need to progress the journey despite being alone. And yet, he chastises N for being unable to press forward alone, even though he himself never needs to press forward alone. It's not exactly a fair comparison, and the theme of pressing forward despite the loss isn't really a prevalent theme during this plot, because as previously discussed, we never lose anybody whose loss is actually felt. The most emotional true losses are probably Chris, who threw away his own life because he wanted to test Noah, and Yoren, who has to die a second time to complete his redemption arc. There are no characters who are lost to test Noah's resolve to continue pressing forward. We never see him prove his resolve by having part of the game without Mio to show he can keep moving forward without her. And yet, he supposedly can because he's hope, while N can't because he's regret. Source? Trust me, bro. This next chapter, Don't Let Your Victories Last. A story isn't exactly very interesting if the heroes always have the advantage over the villains. It should be a struggle to gain the upper hand, deliver incredible payoff from finally achieving victory. But if you let that victory last too long, you risk your story becoming boring because the heroes are never challenged again. Xenoblade is well aware of this and doesn't let the high of finally getting the strength to beat a villain last too long. Xenoblade 1, it had been a long journey of getting pushed to our limits, but Shulk finally unleashes the Monado and gains the strength to overcome Face Mechon. We're now riding off of the high of finally getting this power, but it doesn't last long, as a new element is introduced to the plot that takes precedence over the fact that we can now defeat Face Mechon, namely that Fiora is still alive. We only get this high briefly, and then it has to take a backseat to a more important plot point. Xenoblade 2 does something similar. Rex finally unleashes the true power of the Aegis, giving him the power to bend the world to his will, allowing him to surpass Jin's speed. We're now riding off of the high of finally becoming stronger than Jin and Malos. But this doesn't last long because Malos has an ace up his sleeve.
Indeed!
Ophion destroys the platform, the cast falls down into Mortha, and now our newfound strength has to take the backseat to this new area being explored in the plot, getting our party together and further exploring Jin in a temporary alliance. Xenoblade delivers moments of finally obtaining the strength to surpass the villains, but never lets it stay the focus for long. There's always something new to keep the plot moving forward, preventing it from getting boring. Xenoblade 3 almost does something similar. You finally get the strength to beat N, as he now does the most telegraphed attacks in the world instead of his crazy anime Jin super speed he was using before, but that's besides the point. You can finally beat him, and Mio's time limit is solved. But the game doesn't let you ride this high for long, because there's a second Annihilator that's going to destroy the city, and does. Just kidding. Just like Mio, it's perfectly fine. Yeah, turns out we can just take Bikini Bottom and push it somewhere else. And that's what they did. There's zero consequences here. Xenoblade 1 and 2 use their moments of finally surpassing the villain's strength as an opportunity to introduce new plot elements to keep the story moving forward. Xenoblade 3 pretends it's about to, but then is like, just kidding, there's no consequences, everything is fine. You could probably put down the game at this point and feel pretty good about things being pretty much solved at this point, unlike Xenoblade 1 and 2, which continue to introduce new elements to keep the player invested. I've seen a lot of people say the game is basically over after the opening Chapter 6 cutscenes, because so much is solved at this point without it segueing into the next interesting plot element. We get to ride this high without something new being introduced to stop things from just being a landslide victory for the heroes from here, which just makes the story boring. You can play this game until the opening cutscene of Chapter 6, and it feels like you've basically won already. Now, about moving the story forward. When making a series of titles that are all connected to each other in some way, one of the most important factors, in my opinion, is continuing to move the story forward in some way, and continuing to expand and grow the world you've made. Xenoblade 1 was the first entry, so here we have the world first getting established. This world was created by the experiment of the scientist Klaus. Him and Galea became as gods. Alvis is the computer and has more power than those two. We got some interesting lore, but there's still some questions here. Xenoblade 2. Here's more reason behind Klaus doing what he did. Here's what he did it with, the conduit. Here's what the Monados and Aegises are, cores of the Trinity processor. Here's another side to Klaus, quite literally. Here's a consequence as a result of your actions in the other video game. In terms of growing one's knowledge of a previous story while moving the overall narrative forward, Xenoblade Chronicles 2 has to be one of the best sequels I've ever seen. But it's also not without mysteries of its own. Where did the conduit come from? Where did it disappear to? It left things open for a future title to answer. So then we come to Xenoblade Chronicles 3, and in terms of the overall narrative, we get, well...
Nothing.
Huh? You heard me. Nothing.
We learn that these two worlds can communicate with each other, and I guess destroy each other. Okay. We get nothing about the conduit, unless you count little details like the theater featuring a gap between the seats that's shaped like the conduit, as if to exemplify the fact that it's now absent. Alright, it's a cool detail, but we already knew that though. And if the conduit is truly gone, then how the heck do we have a Monado in the form of Lucky 7? It's never directly said, but the game gives enough evidence to classify this sword as a Monado. You've got a hole near the center of the hilt, you've got Monado symbols, and most importantly, you've got a blade that reacts to the wielder's emotions. You can't just put in something like this that should seemingly be incredibly important to the overall narrative, and then literally throw it out instead of explaining it. This is something that wasn't touched on by the DLC either, as far as I'm aware, but I'm not someone that digs into every little detail to try and piece everything together. But you also shouldn't have to be to make the story feel like it's contributing to the overall narrative. The game never touches on the conduit or anything related to the overall narrative and lore. The littlest hints of it doing so are never explained, or just tell us what we already know. The return at the end of this story brings us back to exactly the way things were at the beginning with no changes, and the entire plot takes place within one singular point in time. Xenoblade 1 and 2 existed alongside each other. If you play one, then the other, it'll greatly expand your understanding of the overall narrative. But if you play Xenoblade 3, all you get is a fun little what-if story, pretty much. It doesn't grow your understanding, it doesn't move the story forward, it doesn't justify its existence. Do you know what it does deliver instead by making the plot it does? fan service. No, I'm not talking that kind of fan service. I mean, things that are going to be enjoyable to see for fans of the series. Whoa, look, a key party member from the first game who got friend-zoned. Whoa, look, it's Best Girl who you thought got friend-zoned but actually didn't. These two can meet each other and become party members again. Whoa, look, it's the races from Xenoblade 1 and Xenoblade 2. You've got one of each of them in your party. Can't believe it took 12 years after the first game to finally have a Machina party member. Whoa, look, there's Poppy. There's a photo. There's the replica Monado. Here's some memories. Here's a brief mention of Tora. Here's details from the two games. Key identifiable traits of the dead titans that form this landmass. Here's gameplay from Xenoblade 1 and 2 turned into a new combination system. Here's a character and a class from Xenoblade Chronicles X, the Full Metal Jaguar, which was Elma's class in that game. Is this going to have some sort of story connection? Finally bring Xenoblade X into the overall story after it's been hinted at for so many years now? Finally shed a bit of light on the cliffhanger ending? Maybe Gray will turn out to be the mysterious Black Knight at the end of X? He's got about the same body figure, cape, and is in an X class. Nope, he's just some dude from the city. Only reason why he has a Xenoblade X class? Fan service. No going deeper than that. Though I did write this script before the reveal of Xenoblade X Definitive, and the trailer of that game did imply that they are going to finally reveal who the Black Knight is after all these years, so I guess I can't be as upsetty about it. I just remember being very disappointed at the time with Xenoblade 3 because I saw a character that was in a Xenoblade X class and I was like, oh, maybe we're finally gonna get some information on this because X is such a mystery, and then I didn't get that. I'm really hoping that X Definitive Edition explains things with this new story content that it's adding. But anyway, the main appeal of this game for longtime fans is not that it's going to take the overall narrative and lore further or finish off this story in some way, because it doesn't, but rather that it will deliver fan service. And don't get me wrong, it's not like I dislike fan service like this. As a longtime fan, yeah, it put a big smile on my face seeing so many things I recognized from games that were meaningful to me. But if you're going to do that without furthering your overall story in any way, well, it's going to become a lot more forgettable than any of the previous titles. This game is driven off of short-term emotional responses, rather than establishing itself as a crucial piece within the overall Xenoblade puzzle. It's more like Xenoblade 1 and 2 are the two pieces to some big puzzle, and 3 is just some bonus set on the side. It's like you ate a 2-course meal at a fancy restaurant, and then came home and had some dessert from your fridge. The dessert is still going to be good, but it's not going to contribute anything meaningful to that 2-course meal you had at the restaurant. I did get a lot of enjoyment playing this game, especially as a longtime Xenoblade fan, but when I think of Xenoblade, I'm not going to be thinking of this dessert, I'm going to be thinking of that fancy 2-course meal. Overpowering versus Acceptance, Zed versus Dark Matter. For this section, I'd like to compare the plot of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 to another game story I couldn't help but find it similar to, that being Pokémon Super Mystery Dungeon. If you don't want spoilers for this title from 2015, then skip this chapter. In Pokémon Super Mystery Dungeon, you're a human brought to the Pokémon world and turned into a Pokémon. You set out with a partner to become explorers at the Expedition Society, but oh no, bad stuff starts happening due to some force pulling strings in the background, similar to Zed, a being known as Dark Matter. Dark Matter is the amalgamation of the negative emotions of Pokémon from all over the world, similar to how Zed is the amalgamation of the fear of moving toward the future. Dark Matter is able to take control of those with darkness in their hearts. Zed can take control of people as well, but not because of how they feel, but whether they happen to be attached to a flame clock, which seems to have nothing to do with their emotions. Those attached to a flame clock often feel like this life kinda sucks and they don't want to be a part of it. Had the power of Moebius been able to control those who still wish to exist in endless now rather than those who are attached to a flame clock, I feel like it would have made those being controlled a lot more relatable. They'd be controlled because of their inherent humanity, not because they happen to still be attached to the system whether they want to be or not. We see this emphasis on humanity in Pokémon Super Mystery Dungeon when we're betrayed by Nuzleaf, who's being used as Dark Matter's puppet. Nuzleaf is essentially your adopted parent in this story, and he's susceptible to harboring negative emotions, so he can be controlled not because he's some inherent big bad who needs to stand in your way, but rather because of his humanity. Dark matter is able to use its puppets to turn Pokemon to stone, which sends their spirit to the Void Realms, an apocalyptic hellhole. It's like if Xenoblade Chronicles 3 is a crummy world that exists in the Endless Now, Super Mystery Dungeon is a normal world, but with a being capable of sending you to the Endless Now, and strives to do so for all life. There is a way to undo the petrification, water from the Luminous Spring, but that gets removed from the equation after breaking the seal with Nuzleaf and him stoning you and getting rid of the water. Now the only way to save those petrified is by defeating dark matter. It's possible to escape petrification from the Voidlands itself, but it's a difficult journey which can't be surpassed without making sacrifices, unlike Xenoblade 3, where we don't really see sacrifices during the journey itself. There's Mio, but wait, never mind. Nia, oh wait, never mind. Ethel and Kamaravi, oh no, never mind. Yorin, who sacrifices himself as a redemption arc. Miyabi, oh, never mind. It doesn't really hold a lot of weight when we don't actually see anything need to be sacrificed during the plot, which also contrasts previous Xenoblade titles. Returning to Super Mystery Dungeon, as the plot goes on, we find out that this wasn't the first time we've faced dark matter. Similar to Xenoblade 3, this foe has been fought before the events of the game. Unlike Zed, however, dark matter had been defeated before, having been destroyed by the hero along with Mew, and peace was restored to the world. But on its destruction, dark matter was shattered and spread across the world, to fester once more in everyone's hearts until it returned once more. It makes this foe seem immortal in a way. We make it to the end, we're all powered up by our scarves that resonate with the Tree of Life, we're beating the crap out of dark matter, but then it seems like we've run out of time. The Tree of Life has seemingly bit the dust. Most of the Pokemon of this world are turned to stone, sent to this world's equivalent of the Endless Now, and all your scarves are good for at this point are just keeping you from turning to stone as you approach impact with the frickin' sun. It seems that all hope is lost, that nothing can be done. But rather than giving up, we fight with what strength we have, and the desire of everyone not to give up, similar to how the colonies of the world in Xenoblade 3 all want to escape the Endless Now by the end. Dark matter cracks, the Tree of Life is revealed to still be hanging on to some life, and the true final battle begins. Dark matter is defeated, but now comes the deciding moment to deal the final blow. But surely you can't. If you do, you'll only delay the inevitable. Shatter dark matter once more, allow it to fester across the world, until it eventually unleashes its wrath once more, destroying some future generation. Dark matter is the amalgamation of negative emotions after all. It can't just be destroyed with brute force. So it asks you, can you muster the strength to break it once more? But that's when your partner says they'll do so, no problem. Why? Because dark matter is a part of the world. Everyone's going to harbor some negative emotions sometimes. Jealousy, hatred, anxiety, depression. But you can't just brute force these emotions into submission. Overcome it like some final boss to be defeated and then it's gone forever. That'd just be lying to yourself. And it's only a matter of time before these emotions come back stronger than before. So rather than defeating dark matter, the partner accepts dark matter, saying, yeah, it can suck feeling this way, harboring some negative emotions, or being subject to others' ill feelings. But it's a part of the world, and we need to accept that that's the way things are. Dark matter belongs in the world, and becomes accepted. And so, on being shattered, we can see a faint thank you as the screen fades, and dark matter, while continuing to exist in the world as negative emotions, it no longer strives to destroy the world. It doesn't return as dark matter. Contrast this to Xenoblade 3's Zed, however, who simply is defeated, overpowered with brute force. The final blow is dealt by sacrificing the embodiment of regret, I guess. It just feels like it doesn't quite carry the same weight. Rather than accepting one's fears of the future as a natural part of being human, that it's alright that there's a little Moebius in us all, saying that it's alright to feel this way, but to just not let it hold you back from moving toward the future and continuing to grow as a person, we instead see Zed brute force defeated. I guess there's no Moebius in us all anymore, as opposed to dark matter which continues to exist in people's hearts. It's accepted rather than defeated. Again, I feel like a lot of this could be a consequence of the type of plot being told, but as a consequence, it loses a lot of the weight it could have otherwise had. Sacrifice for a better world. The finale of Xenoblade Chronicles 3 focuses on this final sacrifice. For the sake of returning the world to its natural state and ending the Endless Now, the two worlds have to be separated, and the heroes need to say goodbye. Amongst the heroes, this is handled well, especially with Noah and Mio. They failed time and again because, much like Moebius, they wanted the Endless Now to persist. Noah couldn't bring himself to lose Mio. It's only after he accepts the sacrifice that he's able to restart the world. Who it's not handled well with, however, is the city. As a result of the world separating, Ionios being no more, the city folk would all die. This world is being erased after all. The excuse the game makes is that it's fine. They'll all be born again eventually. All that needs to happen is the chance of every single family tree continuing the exact same way again in the two separate worlds as it did in Ionios. Super simple. Even putting aside the absurdity of things happening the exact same way again, you also have to realize that some pairings will become literally impossible if they are between Kevis and Agnes characters. Unless, of course, we're just meant to presume that nobody in all the generations of the city ever decide to get it on with somebody who corresponds to the other world. Maybe the city is just strictly against interracial couples or something. The same genetic combinations are not going to happen in vastly different conditions, a vastly different world, and a vastly different pool of available partners. It's a pretty naive solution to say everybody from the city will come about again with a new life, and yet it's the stance Xenoblade 3 takes. Why does it take this stance? Well, to answer that question, I once again want to compare to Pokémon Mystery Dungeon, this time to Explores. If you don't want spoilers, again, skip this chapter. Pokémon Mystery Dungeon Explores features two distinct worlds. One is the present day, equivalent to the two separate worlds in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 where things are at peace, and the future, equivalent to Ionios in Xenoblade Chronicles 3 where everything is screwed up in the Endless Now. Time is collapsing in the present, which leads to a future set in a post-apocalyptic landscape where time itself is frozen. This is a world of great suffering, where normally tame beings may even resort to exploiting one another to survive, and the beings of this world live in fear. This is a world of perpetual darkness. There are no cycles to the day, no sun to cast its light and warmth on the world. The only light to be found within this world is the stockade, a place of execution, as if to say the only way out from this world of darkness is through death. The goal of this game? Stop the collapse of Temporal Tower in the present, the mythical tower keeping time in check, and subduing the corrupt god of time, Primal Dialga.
The plot of this game is a desperate struggle for a world in which time can continue to flow.
I swear, it's like Xenoblade Chronicles 3 took hefty inspiration from my two favorite Pokemon games ever made. This game, too, places a heavy emphasis on the theme of sacrifice, but not sacrifice in the form of, I'm going to be separated from those I care about, but rather, sacrifice in the form of, I'm literally going to die and leave behind my best friend who now needs to learn how to live on their own after I became the supportive crutch that gave them the confidence to make something of their life, as well as sacrificing the entire world of the current future and everybody in it to pave the way for a better future. You see, the plot here is that you are from the future, and changing the future means erasing the current one, and everything from the erased future will vanish forever. No excuse like, oh surely they'll be born again. Nothing to take off that weight of sacrifice before it happens. Full force, this is the consequence of these actions. You have some allies from the future, such as Grovyle and Celebi, who are determined to make a better future, not because it's something they'll be able to live in, but because they believe in the value of their sacrifice if it means that it creates a brighter world for others. So while they may die, the results of their actions would live on, perpetuating their spirit metaphorically. So if the day is going to come they die anyway, why not live for something meaningful? Let their lives shine. Of course, not everyone is going to feel that way, however, which brings us to our main antagonists of the story, Primal Dialga, Dusknoir, and the Sableye. Primal Dialga is the god of time driven to madness with a single-minded goal of self-preservation, and the Sableye are the relatively generic henchmen. The main antagonist to stand in our way as the representative of the future we're trying to destroy is Dusknoir. Dusknoir holds no love for the future of darkness by any means, but it's the world he lives in. He stands against Grovyle, not because he doesn't want time to flow, but out of fear, self-preservation. Grovyle is on track to destroying the dark future and everything in it to make a brighter future. We do eventually see Dusknoir begin to understand Grovyle's point of view, however, and start to believe in himself as more than just someone able to perpetuate his own existence, but rather as someone whose actions could shine bright through the lives of those who get to enjoy the brighter future he helped to craft, despite being a world he would never know. This is a tale without truly evil characters. The foes who stand against you just want to live, to not have their lives be sacrificed in the name of some greater good they'll never be a part of. Sure, it's a better world for you guys, but what about us from the future? In Xenoblade Chronicles 3, we could have absolutely seen the people from the city be like, sure, it's a better world for you guys, but what about us born in Ionios? Because the people from the two worlds who are pulled into the cycle of Ionios get to go back to worlds at peace, at the sacrifice of Ionios and everyone that was born in this world. We do see some anti-war folk from the city, but not because they don't want to be sacrificed. They wouldn't even know this is a potential consequence, as we don't find out until toward the end of the game. But rather, their reasons are essentially because they figure, Kevus and Agnes are just perpetually fighting each other out there, let them have at it. We shouldn't be losing some of our own and putting resources towards stopping it. We're just fine here the way things are. Let those guys keep killing each other and we can live in peace. So, while Pokemon Mystery Dungeon is like, the people in the present are just fine and working towards sacrificing everyone from the hellhole of a world, Xenoblade 3 is like, the people of the two worlds are living in a hellhole and want to separate the worlds, which works towards sacrificing everyone who's living just fine and normally. In Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, those being sacrificed have it real rough, and their sacrifice ensures that nobody will need to exist in that kind of world again. You can understand why the sacrifice has to be made. Whereas in Xenoblade 3, those being sacrificed have it just fine. They're being sacrificed that all the people who don't currently have it fine can have it fine. The people being sacrificed in Xenoblade 3 have far greater reason to be pissed off and stand against the heroes than the antagonists in PMD2. Heck, maybe they'd have even more reason than Moebius. The only true-born Moebius aren't even people, just an amalgamation of the idea, oh no, the future is scary. They don't seek to perpetuate themselves, but rather to perpetuate the endless now, the world in the state it's in. All that turned Moebius would have also had to know what they were getting into by becoming Moebius, that they are not going to be living forever anymore, as the day will come that they'll eventually die. If they wanted to keep on living forever, they just stay in the cycle. If they make the choice to join the Moebius alphabet, that means you're risking death, and because the now is endless, that day is eventually going to come. The only people who are truly at risk of death and being sacrificed against their will are the people from the city. We all have to die so you can have a chiller life like we have, and meanwhile, what do you have to sacrifice? This would have been an interesting and incredibly serious topic to explore. Is the sacrifice of a small amount of people who live in a world of peace warranted if it means a greater number of people can live in a world of peace? Is it justified to trade lives like this? Set up this story like some sort of trolley problem. So why isn't this explored more like it is in Pokemon Mystery Dungeon? Because in PMD, that's what the plot is. But in Xenoblade 3, that isn't what the plot is. Mystery Dungeon is a plot of sacrifice for the greater good. The lesson that it's not about how long you live, but rather what you accomplish with your life. Xenoblade 3 is a plot of fear of moving toward the future. That the future is a scary road that sometimes comes with sacrifices, losing those you care about, but that you need to keep moving forward rather than living in a self-destructive endless now. The theme of this game is about personal sacrifice, not the sacrifice of others. So sacrificing those in the city isn't included because it just wouldn't work with the story being told. This would be like trying to put two completely different stories and messages into one narrative, which, I mean, can be done, but is going to detract from being able to just fully explore one core idea. It would be like taking Xenoblade 3, but shoehorning PMD2 in there as well and hoping it works. And so, while I think a plot about what it means to be alive and shine in your life would be incredible to see for a Xenoblade story, it's not exactly easy to do both, at least without drastically changing the story. If we're in the middle of an emotional moment of personal sacrifice of the characters not being able to see those they care about the most anymore, meanwhile we just see all the city folk dying, well, now what are you supposed to feel? So I can't really blame the writers wanting to avoid that. But the most naive possible excuse of the same family trees will surely happen again and all the people from the city will be just fine. Come on, that's just a lazy writing. Just an easy out so the player can feel big sad about the separation of the two worlds, instead of being uncomfortable like, wait, isn't this happening as we're committing genocide? If I were to write my own easy out for this problem, here's what I'd do. Everyone's data is stored in Origin, right? That means that data would have had to be written there prior to the merger of the worlds. You're saving your game. Well, the founders of Origin are right here, Melia and Nia. Get them to add everybody from the city to Origin. Do some save data manipulation. Just add them. Bada bing, bada boom, and easy out like that. While still lazy, at least makes sense in a way you know the people of Ionios wouldn't be sacrificed. And means the events of Ionios actually have a more established long-term impact on the two separated worlds, if you've now got all these new people added. Perhaps then you've got races from both worlds present in both worlds, so at least there's a long-term change in that sense. By knowing the people of the city wouldn't be sacrificed, that gives the plot free reign to focus on the thing it came here to focus on, instead of saying, no, we'll be sacrificed, but we'll probably be back, hopefully, maybe, and leaving the player wondering about what the heck happened with that aspect of the plot. Let's talk about the voice acting and the cutscenes just a smidge. As always with the Xenoblade series, this game does have some pretty stellar voice acting. Not many complaints with the voice acting itself. There's the notes I had about Noah earlier about feeling like he doesn't get all that expressive with his emotions, but I'd say that's more a fault of the direction given for the character, as the voice actor clearly has a lot of ability to get emotional, as we see with Console N.
My feelings have never changed. They're the same as they've always been. They're for you, Mio. The time I had with you meant everything to me. But now, it's all gone. If she truly is gone, I'll have to redo it all. Watch me rewind our clocks back to the start. Noah, my long shadow. You have stolen her away from me. I will extinguish you and take her back. Mio is mine. She's not yours. She's mine. You are nothing. She belongs only to me.
One character I wanted to mention specifically is I really love the direction they went for Riku. Gotta love how they went from comic relief to failed comic relief to comic relief to Batman.
Noah giving up now of all time?
I don't want to give up. But we're trapped here. Our blades. I hope at least she can go in peace.
Of course Noah trapped. Noah still not tried to draw Lucky 7.
Huh?
Remember? Back when Riku give wisdom? When need of true power, sword will appear.
Yeah. I remember.
Today is day of need. Even at edge, facing sheer drop, must never give up.
It's a fun change of pace, and I quite enjoyed Riku's presence in cutscenes. Apart from those notes, when it comes to the voice work itself, yeah, gotta say it's pretty great. I'll just hope so. I'll hope that that's the case. I just switched past the uni for a hot second, and she goes, yes! However, I found the voice acting lacking in this game in terms of its overall presence. Talking to NPCs and doing side quests, if there's no voice acting there, it's like, sure, whatever. It would have been nice, but it's not necessary. But when you have mandatory story cutscenes that aren't being voice acted, well, it's pretty jarring, especially when you come out of a full voice acted cutscene into immediate no voices, you just need to read it out. All of these story cutscenes without voice acting typically means it's something of very minor importance, usually relating to some tutorial like, let's go do the thing we need to do to progress the mandatory tutorial bundled in with story content. So I feel like it happened a lot more frequently in the first few chapters, but it was something that continued to persist from time to time throughout the game, and just made me disappointed every time it cropped up. Previous Xenoblade titles had all of their story cutscenes voice acted, no questions asked, unless I'm misremembering here. So I found it really jarring for Xenoblade 3 to regress in this regard. It should have at least done the Xenoblade standard, if not tried to exceed it. It would have been incredible if it had been handled like Fire Emblem Three Houses, where everything gets voice acted. As for the cutscenes, I do love me some Xenoblade cutscenes. Like the other titles, there are different types of cutscenes. One is the handcrafted high-quality cutscenes that are just eye candy. Another is the animation preset cutscenes that are still used for a lot of story content, but typically when characters are just talking and you don't have to go that hard, so you may as well save some resources here. Then you've got even more basic animation preset cutscenes with speech bubbles that are usually for quests, or sometimes rarely for minor story content. When I think of Xenoblade cutscenes, I'll be thinking of the handcrafted high-quality cutscenes. Look at how clean this is.
How could she react so quickly? I can't seem to hit her.
What's that sound?
She's so fast. And yet, her moves are really simple. It's almost like they have a rhythm.
Wasn't that awesome? But what if I told you that's the best of them, and that doesn't really happen much anymore for the rest of the game? The reason? Ouroboros. Every other encounter for the rest of the game, if the heroes are giving it their all, they're in their flesh mechs. And the animators still tried to make these cutscenes go hard, but in my opinion, it's just not as visually appealing as seeing a well-choreographed and beautifully animated one-on-one as just people. After the first battle where the main characters meet one another, the only times I really recall there being cutscenes that went hard without using Ouroboros are when the heroes fight each other after M hacks their Neuralinks, and when we're fighting all our former friends console-wise controlling. And these cutscenes are super cool. I personally would have loved more of these, and less of the generic flesh mech duking it out. Outside of battles, there are some really awesome handcrafted cutscenes. The lighting, the camera angles, just amazing stuff like Xenoblade typically has. But I know I'm not the only one who noticed cutscene quality severely went down after Chapter 6's beginning. Remember how I've said, in multiple different chapters now, that after the beginning of Chapter 6, it feels like the game is basically over? Well, here's another way. The super beautiful handcrafted cutscenes? Yeah, the only ones from here that I felt had significant wow factor are breaking into Origin and the final battle and ending. After the beginning of Chapter 6, there's two big battles before the end that just have basic animation presets chatting and no handcrafted battle cutscene, that being versus Yorn and D, and the final battle versus N. Last time we faced Moebius DJ, we had a long battle cutscene against them, really duking it out and struggling until Uni used his strength against him to find victory. This time, yeah, nothing really. We do get some handcrafted cutscenes here, but no more epic battles. Then the final battle against N, the final confrontation with our counterpart of Regret, who we've faced in handcrafted cutscenes a few times now. Yeah, this final battle is a whole bunch of standing around and talking. Fighting is gameplay only now. I was definitely rather disappointed, to say the least. The quality of post-Chapter 6 kind of felt like the gameplay of the second half of Dark Souls 1, where all the major effort went into this stuff that came before, and what follows is just whatever we can slap together before launch. It really felt like most of the budget had been used up, and that the span of time between the beginning of Chapter 6 and the end of the final chapter just gets the short end of the stick. And now for some miscellaneous story stuff. There's some other story details I wanted to mention, but I feel like don't warrant their own sections, so now it'll just be some bullet points. The amount of connections a story has to number 7, an important number in a biblical context and one connected to the biblical tale of Noah. We have Lucky 7, 7 chapters to the story, 7 members in an active party. There's lots of 7s. Of course, there's the actual name of Noah, drawing a clear connection to the tale of bringing together 2 of every species in this story about these pairs of Ouroboros and the 2 worlds. Xenoblade obviously loves making religious allusions, and this title was no different. Ethel and Kamaravi's deaths lose a lot of their significance when they're brought back anyway. This is a world with this cycle of respawning, and they've both got interesting kits that could become interesting classes when they lend their support as a 7th party member. Having Ethel and Kamaravi along with their classes is definitely pretty nice, but it does kind of suck that the story had to take this hit. You could have just had characters that have basically their classes anyway, like some pupils of them or something like that, instead of, oh, they died, never mind, they're back and you can recruit them, but I don't know. Also, the final cutscene of this game is pre-rendered, which features Ethel as an adult. Ethel being an adult at this point was the case for me and many other players, but I later found out that a lot of players hadn't done the Kamaravi questline to completion, meaning that Ethel was still just a kiddo, or even still just in the respawning pod, but then all of a sudden she shows up as an adult at the end, alive and well. This left a lot of players very confused as to how the heck that happened. Lanz's side story. This features some special green flame clock. What makes this flame clock special? Who knows? You break it just like any other and that's the end of that. This paralogue also features the return of Garvel, an old bully from the Kevis Trio's training days. He's freed from the flame clock, and Lanz tells him to go to Colony 4 before the side story concludes. If you later go and talk with Garvel in Colony 4, he's just immediately like, yeah, I don't get along with people here. I guess we're going to Colony 9 instead, and then despawns on the spot and then appears in Colony 9 from here on. Okay, what was even the point of him coming to Colony 4 then? Why didn't Lanz just tell him to go to Colony 9 in the first place? Was the original plan Colony 4, but later in development the developers changed their minds to Colony 9, but they just didn't have the chance to redo the voice line, so they just implemented this band-aid fix? Just, why? What is the point? When the party has only recently come together and they're deciding a route, there's the choice of shorter, more dangerous route, and longer, but safer route. Mio decides the party should go longer, safer route. Wait, doesn't she only have 2 months to live? Wouldn't it be in her best interest to take the short route despite the risk? When Ethel's giving you route ideas forward, the initial route shown is a direct shot, but it can't be done because every ship that's gone through there has been destroyed. But since no ship can make it through there right now, the party is given the north route, which will take about 2 months. Mio only has 2 months to live. She'd die by the time the heroes reach their destination. This led me to believe the heroes would choose the center route out of necessity so that Mio would still be alive on the other end. But nope, that's not what happened. This center route is only brought up for payoff toward the end of the game when you successfully ram a ship up Zed's origin, because that's what's blocking that center route. That's why ships couldn't get past, because Origin's in the way and it screws with them, or whatever. So then, why include this specific timestamp about the other route taking 2 months? Because it sure doesn't take anywhere near 2 months. Just say it'll take a bit longer is all. Don't mark the exact amount of time the player has been told one of the main characters left to live, have the cast take that route, and then it takes nowhere near that estimate of time. This game's a mess. In Xenoblade Chronicles 2, there was a hot spring scene for mostly fan service, a smidge for plot to show there's something Nia's hiding. In Xenoblade Chronicles 3, however, we get a bath scene towards the beginning of the game that actually subtly serves the plot by showing the behavior and social norms of our characters. In the scene, the baths are a tool by which to relax the body after having just fought and defeated an opposing colony not long prior. These are mixed baths, and there's no aspect of social awkwardness here. These are people who know life only as soldiers. They have concepts of friendship and camaraderie, but no concept of romance, and probably view a difference in sex as our bodies are different and who knows why, as they only find out why much later in the story.
Alright then, lads and lasses. Who wants to know how babies are made? Well, you're in for a surprise. Buckle up! What's he gonna do? Oh!
He's pulling his cock out!
The only life they know is fight to live and live to fight. Why would there be any aspect of social awkwardness here? But then the party becomes Ouroboros. They're freed from the flame clock and are given the chance to forge their own path that leads however they see fit. rather than needing to follow the whims of the clock. They're no longer just soldiers, and what do we see as the characters are changing clothes? Social awkwardness. The guys don't want to change in front of the girls. It's like by being freed from the system, they suddenly became more human. They get to live with things like the idea of awkwardness, no longer trapped in a world that steers all their thoughts and actions towards the battles ahead. It's honestly an impressive use of subtle storytelling. In his first encounter, Moebius DJ claims that you will be an enemy of the world, and then proceeds to shine the Moeb signal. But what does this really do? I guess it turns their home colonies against them of Colony 9 and Gamma, but that's it, really. It's not like it signals the other Moebius to come after you, because they never do. They just chill around unless you start smucking up their colonies. And after doing this, D just immediately dips out to the other Moebius in a hot second anyway. He could have totally just been like, by the way guys, watch out for these jerks. But no, he doesn't do that. The game makes it seem like a big deal. You are now an enemy of the world. Epic movie sound effect. But it's not long until we find out that signal did literally nothing except seem to turn the heroes' home colonies against them. And not even for that long, considering this brainwashing thingamabob doesn't even last until the next time that the heroes show up at their respective colonies. They're just kind of greeted like normal. So making this out to be some big thing, while it's really not though. Maybe it's more symbolic of all of us Moebius are going to be working against you now, if you step into our safety squares, but come on. Noah's spicy sword. It's already pretty neat, but it's just a sheath for an even spicier sword. And whenever he unsheaths it, the sheath becomes a freaking Iron Man arm in a hella cool animation, and that's the only time we ever see this animation happen. Every other time, he either already has it unsheathed and on his arm, or he unsheaths it and it just teleports onto his arm. Why does the thing become like an Iron Man arm? Who knows? This is never brought up. Well, let's face it though, the arm is hella cool. Surely that'll afford a lot of opportunity to do really cool things, right? Well, we get the animation the first time, and second time he deflects a mega laser with it, and then nothing cool is ever done with it for the rest of the game. Deflecting the mega laser that Senna was so worried about hitting Tyon shows that the defensive capabilities of this thing are absolutely insane. If it can no problemo guard against something that puts an Ouroboros at risk. So surely we'll see him use this arm to guard against other things. Maybe catch a blade in his hand during a one-on-one battle or something. But nothing like this ever happens, because anytime the heroes are in a difficult battle, they're almost always in their Ouroboros forms. He almost used it against the Robo Queen, but Lance pulled a Professor Oak and said now is not the time to use that. This Iron Man arm had so much potential as a one-on-one badassery tool, but it just isn't used. Anytime we're facing one really tough opponent, we're not going to be doing it on the ground, we're going to be doing it in our flesh mechs. Also, this is more so to do with gameplay than story, but I wanted to mention it anyway. If Noah realizes the sword is so strong, why doesn't he just use it all the time? It'll happen from time to time in cutscenes, and in gameplay, you need to charge up your talent art, and then you can unsheath the sword and use it until the timer runs out. Why? Does something happen if he uses it too long? I guess he's only comfortable using it for so long for some reason? Mandatory hero quests I found a little bit jarring, like they put a slight wedge into the natural flow of the story. I suppose the mandatory ones are ones that give particular field skills that you need to progress, but maybe you could have just given these to the player in a different way and have these hero quests be as they feel they should be. Optional side content, a quest you do on the side to unlock a new hero and class. I suppose the developers wanted to make sure that every player was getting a handful of classes even if they skipped everything they could. Also, the zipline thing makes sense as Juniper's field skill, living in an environment where you use those to traverse. But climbing for Valdi? Yes, when I imagine the hero who'd be most adept at climbing vines, I imagine the mechanic. So to climb the vines and make it to the next area, we have to free this colony and do this plot line about, oh no, Mecha Friend who was literally only just made a few minutes ago we're somehow supposed to feel sad about. I suppose you could make the argument this ensures the player finds out that they can free the colonies, and ensures that by going through the story there would be some colonies freed from flame clocks along the way, But I mean, there were already ones that you would free as part of the story anyway, like Ethel's. And I feel like this would have been better left as side content, or integrated into the main story in a better way. Like maybe during these mandatory hero quests is when you encounter Consul M in the way that I had suggested when discussing N and M. There were several smaller scenes in this game I felt were handled well, like when it brought up the idea of atonement. We're here seeing them off, even if we don't see them as people, to atone for the fact that by the end, we're the ones standing while they're not. The meaning of evil and what it means to be a villain, that's a really neat conversation in this game. Captain Triton gets a point all on his own. He's just all about going on them swashbuckling adventures, and I'm all here for it.
Oh, what an impulsive pair ye two make. Anyway, cool your heads and have some grub with me.
Grub?
You need food if you want energy. Don't go telling me you don't eat now.
Yeah, get real. What's this deal?
But you're all skin and bones, the lot of you. Right, laddie?
All right, steady on. Anyhow, I'm not even hungry.
I'm not gonna bite your heads off, pipsqueaks. Don't just stand there. Ah, I do love the sea, so I'm taking this thing on a trip.
Moebius? On a trip?
Of course! A man's life is a long journey. Walk your path without a destination, and you'll get little encounters like this one. That'll be a win for me, then.
Our guests are the winners, Captain.
What?
I did ask for the most valuable booty. What our guests have brought sells for 10 times more than that coconut. And while the coconut is certainly delicious, its value is only so-so.
Maybe the value is only so-so, but have you seen it? Look at the size, and it tastes fantastic.
Winners of contest are honored guests.
Man of the Sea, Triton's Triple Challenge, Part 4.
What?
The last challenge be a good old punch-up. The winner gets, what do I need?
7 points?
What he said. Good. Now, put him up.
Well, this is taking the piss. It's called the Triple Challenge.
Yes, we agree for once. What happened to a man doesn't go back on his word?
You be right. He doesn't. But a man always wants more.
Ugh, this clod. What crud is he spouting now?
It's the same stuff he's been spouting from the start.
Lance!
Huh?
You better pay attention. Man of the Seas, sucker, punch!
Lance! You okay? What a bloody underhanded way to start a fight, arsehole.
Carelessness on the sea gets you killed. A man's gonna pay attention every second of every minute.
Sorry, Captain can't be stopped when he gets like this. Friends, watch out or get sucked into Captain Tornado!
Kamaravi, I feel like, could have been more established as a character by the time we face him. We hear about him through scenes that show he's uber powerful, and we hear about how he's Ethel's rival, and that's about all we know. So when we face him and Ethel, the party's all about Ethel and saving her, since she's the one the party knows. Kamaravi is just the other guy that happens to be there. He even takes out his own eye in a bid to not be controlled by others, to make his own fate, and that's honestly hella cool. But it still doesn't have as much of an impact as it could be, because we still don't really know him. To be fair, a lot of this stuff I say the story could use more context behind might be a bit of a tall ask when you consider the game already has, 14 hours of cutscenes, so it might be unreasonable to expect full context behind characters like this. We have full context behind one, and perhaps the writers thought that was good enough, as long as we have one emotional attachment here, and if that was their thought process, I can't blame them. But I still feel like scenes like this are made in such a way that they would have had a much better payoff had we had more context. In this case, being understanding who Kamaravi really is as a person, and creating some sort of prior meeting between him and the heroes. So many of the Ascension quests being based around colony relations, oftentimes with their counterparts from the other side. That was cool to see. While some are open to the idea of working with their former enemies, or feel like they need to do whatever it takes to prosper together, others may still have reservations. Now with that, I think that's about everything I had to say about the main game story of Xenoblade Chronicles 3. Everything you've listened to up until this point has been in one recording. I've been recording for 3 hours and 10 minutes, holy crap. Well, I'm pretty sure that's everything I wanted to say about the main game. Time for the DLC. Because what you've heard until now was my main game video essay I wrote most of the script for over 2 years ago, I never actually wrote one for the DLC. My memory of the DLC story isn't quite as strong as the main game, as I remember during the DLC not understanding what the hell was happening half the time. But we've come this far, so we may as well talk about the DLC. I rewatched it as a bit of a recap and threw together this shorter part of the video on it. Just like with the main game, let's quickly go through the story events itself first. This is a prologue story, which when I first heard, thought it might serve to lead into and answer a lot of the questions of the main game. Rather, the heroes of the DLC face and defeat a seemingly even greater threat than Zed that existed before the main game. This big bad was previously faced by Shulk and Rex, which resulted in Rex losing his right arm, forcing him to use his left like Dunban after his prolonged use of the Monado, and resulted in Rex losing his left eye, reminding him of Zeke. Matthew was a lad from the original city that existed before End destroyed it. Oh, well, that's one question answered. Yeah, there were survivors. He's the grandson of the child Noah and Mio had during one of their incarnations, whose name turns out to be Gondor, because Gondor is seemingly going to become the new Xenoblade Van Damme where they're everywhere. So he's the great-grandson of En. He has a sister named Niall who went missing after the events at the city who he's setting out to find. While Matthew is all about helping out Kevis and Agnes soldiers and freeing them from flame clocks, Niall would rather leave them alone and stay in their own peaceful bubble, not seeing them as worth saving. After the events of the city, Matthew is found by A, who's essentially Elvis from the first game, and just like Elvis, wields a Monado somehow, despite the conduit being gone, so I don't know how that works. Maybe it's still super strong, but just not as strong? While Logos and Numa, aka Malos and Pyra/Mithra, were the male and female persona, Ontos, aka Elvis, was somewhere in the middle. So the male Elvis we knew is now little more than a machine, calling himself Alpha, and now being our big bad to take down, while the Elvis we knew is now A. Matthew and A set out to find lost city survivors and find his sister. Turns out, Matthew has an early form of Ouroboros power, where he can't yet interlink to become an Ouroboros like in the main game, but rather, it's like he summons a persona that does extra damage. Unlike the main game, if you use this Ouroboros power near others, it grants it to them too, so you can spread it around if you're not social distancing. Matthew overhears a battle between colonies and goes to check it out. Total annihilation on both sides save for Glimmer and Nickel, who continue to fight one another. So Matthew gets involved to break up their fighting. The consuls arrive and do battle, Glimmer's still loyal to them and tries to kill Matthew while he's distracted, and A gets to stabbing. Despite their efforts, Glimmer still wants to kill Nickel, and is upsetty spaghetti because she was freed from the flame clock so close to her homecoming she wanted to make it to. She darts off in the night and ends up finding Shulk's group. Hey, look, the hero from the first game! They take her in, and she promptly calls the tactical nuke on them in the form of an allied colony to try to get a ride home. Anyway, the consul's not all happy to see her since she's not attached to a flame clock and tries to kill her. Shulk shows up and reveals they had a deal with Zed to stay out of each other's business until Alpha is dealt with. The consul's like, that's true, until 2 of my allies were cut down. So Matthew, A, and Nickel appear to help, and super sexed up Rex arrives who's now dual wielding the Aegis swords, which is super badass. Things get even more pressing when the consul summons a second colony for Honest and fuses them together, which does something, but he's promptly defeated. Glimmer finally decides to come along for good, and the group sets out for Colony 9 from the first game. It's never directly said, but heavily implied Nickel is Shulk's son, and Glimmer is Rex's daughter, though it's not really clear who his other kid is, unless plot twist the blonde one is Nickel. How funny would that be? Shulk, Rex, and A are the only characters directly from previous games, but there are several familiar looking faces implied to be children of other characters from previous games. Also, Riku's here, so I guess he's some kind of immortal being. The party makes it to Colony 9, where we find this group calls themselves the Liberators, and there are many freed soldiers they are teaching how to live normally. A scouting party that responded to a distress call returns along with what they found, and Matthew finds among the items a wristband that belonged to his sister. So the group sets out to see what they can find. A explains to Shulk and Rex that Niall has been inhabited as an avatar by Alpha, similar to how Zanza once resided in Shulk, and that Alpha's goal is to make a new world just for the city folk. Surprise! Niall appears, which the party tells Matthew is not his sister, and they'll try to save her, and we do battle. Looks like Moebius wants Alpha destroyed too, so they've got N on the job, who manages to damage Alpha's core crystal. Alpha sets out for Prison Island, the super important location of the first game, and reveals Origin is just up there like the Majora's Mask moon. While the party wants to save Niall, N would rather just kill her and Alpha as the easiest route, despite her being his great-granddaughter. Shulk and Rex give exposition we had during the main game about how Ionios came to be, but this time with more information by revealing that Untos was used as the core of Origin. But then Untos, Alpha, became evil because
Alpha deemed our existence obsolete and wanted to erase us.
And Shulk, Rex, and Moebius fought together against Alpha, weakening him and buying some time. The heart of Origin is called the Ark, because of course it is, where Alpha gathers city people so they can set out for a new world. Niall served as a suitable host because she doesn't like Kevis and Agnes armies, but loves the people of the city. The heroes decide to set out for Prison Island and Origin, along with Nickel and Glimmer, who decide they want to help out. But before we do that, we have to do this subplot of powering up our Ouroboros power by fighting Shulk and Rex. It would seem A is still capable of seeing the future through visions, but elects not to share it as it is subject to change through the hero's will. Lucky 7 also makes its first appearance. It would seem fog beasts are signs of the strained world, which were foes we first encountered in the new epilogue story added with Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, where they were called a whole new threat for a whole new world, I'm pretty sure. We don't really see actual fog beasts in the main game as far as I recall, though there is a lot of mention of the black fog itself, but they're rather prevalent in the DLC story. Also, turns out Matthew's weapon dear old granddad Gondor gave him has part of Origin. We make it to the top of Prison Island and confront N. N wants to kill Matthew because Niall and Alpha are waiting on Matthew to arrive as a prerequisite before leaving. We then have a really cool battle with N I wish we could have also had during the final battle against him in the main game. The entire party is then given a proper flashback to show what happened to the original city. Looks like Alpha wanted to take all the city people to this new world. Gondor encounters his dear old daddy N. N and Niall Alpha duke it out, and N is about to win before Granddad Gondor sacrifices himself to save her. Matthew then witnesses N stabbing his granddad, which begins his hatred for Moebius. It would seem the reason N was asked to kill the city's people was to eliminate that source of power of Alpha's, a reason Matthew's not all that happy about, feeling like the future was entrusted to all of them. Then Alpha transports us into his memory of the old world, where we get to see a city alongside one of the beanstalk towers attached to the orbital space station, such as the World Tree was in Xenoblade 2. We then head towards the piano music we hear Niall playing. We then have a conversation with Niall, while the radio playing in the background confirms that Xenoblade Chronicles X is canon. Wait, what the fuck? Niall reveals that Alpha wants to set out to make a new world like this one, where the city people can live. But this world is fundamentally flawed, as it's the one that led to Klaus's experiment. On A pointing this out, we see the world around us become more like Moritha, the destroyed world from Xenoblade 2. Matthew makes a point that it's wrong to strip away people's choice in how they live their lives, and whoever threatens that is the real enemy. So let's oppose Alpha, or Moebius, or whoever else that could be. Alpha's not having that though, and the final battle begins. There's generic dialogue from Alpha about how he understands things so much better than the heroes, and as a higher being, he's doing what's right. Alpha then starts unconsensually giving Matthew the suck, trying to convince him to change sides, and then arrives and strikes at Alpha, freeing Niall. Alpha then makes the final battlefield super epic, and then changes to look like he came straight out of Persona, and then uses the power of the Sword of the End, along with Matthew's Fists of the End, to unlock the true power of Ouroboros, with Matthew using Numa's, Pyra and Mithra's, core crystal that was revealed to be in the gauntlet, and N presumably using Logos's, Malos's, core crystal, though it's never directly said. Matthew and his friends then become the first true Ouroboros, and punches Alpha in the face. Alpha asks Matthew if he has any regrets making the future uncertain, and Matthew says, yep, lots, but we keep moving forward. Shulk, Rex, and A then have to sacrifice themselves because, I honestly couldn't tell you. Shulk and Rex then remove their kids from the cycle to allow them to live full lives, which is apparently against some sort of rules, and assure them they'll meet again because people will eventually set the world back to normal, with Origin resetting everything. The Majora's Mask Moon then falls into where it is in the main game, destroying all the DLC area in its path for a reason why we never see it during the main game. Now the only foe that remains is Moebius. Matthew continues a theme Shulk and Rex laid out about inherited will, where even if he doesn't defeat Moebius, someone else will. Maybe that someone will even be N. Riku and Nickel continue researching the Ouroboros power so that a future generation can use its full potential. Matthew then sets out and reveals his last name to be Vandam, which in the main game was the important family of Guernica, Monica, and Gondor, whose ancestor founded the city we know in the main game. I'm pretty sure it's been a hot second. Then the credits roll, showing cutscenes of all 3 games, seemingly meant to be a conclusion to the trilogy. After the credits, we see the 2 worlds separate, and then they come back together again. What the fuck? And now Xenosaga is apparently canon too, maybe. What with this scene here, and also a name drop during the radio sequence earlier. I don't know how that's going to work with licensing rights from Bandai Namco. I mean, Nintendo and Bamco are pretty good buddy-buddies, so maybe they worked something out. Hold on, just hold on a second. What the spark just happened? Wasn't the whole point of the main game that to be able to move toward the future, you had to make sacrifices and embrace uncertainty, and so the characters had to say goodbye, ignoring the city folk genocide, of course. I already wasn't happy when the game kept the ending open, with Noah hearing Mio's off-seeing tune and vanishing in the crowd, implying that maybe there's some way they'll meet again, destroying the entire lesson of the story when it turns out he probably didn't have to sacrifice anything, just so the ending could be less sad. But now we're taking that a step further. The entire plot of the game was about separating the worlds so we can keep moving towards the future, and then after it happens, the worlds just come back together again anyway? Maybe the events of the game still matter because this new conjoined world is actually moving toward the future instead of being stuck in the endless now? What happened to them annihilating each other because they're made of opposing kinds of matter? I mean, they were one world before the events of any of the games, so I guess there's some way to do it without freezing time? Maybe that some way is what happened? Did Origin do this? That's not what it was designed to do, but if it's capable of freezing the worlds together, I guess maybe it can do something like this? But again, what is the point of the plot if it doesn't even matter? Or let's consider another possibility. Before this shot, we get a shot of Jupiter, implying this is our solar system as we know it, so before the worlds separated for the first time. That would then mean that this separation is into the worlds of Xenoblade 1 and 2, and then this union is Ionios from Xenoblade 3, that we're seeing a cutscene from before the events of this game. Well then, why have the Xenosaga connection with Cosmos seemingly falling towards the world if this world is ultimately erased? There's no way the next game's going to bring us back to Ionios just to be like, hey, there's other stuff that happened here we didn't mention the first time around. Here's what happened to Cosmos in this world that ultimately gets deleted. Like, what a waste of time that would be. So, I'm getting mixed messages here about whether this is Ionios or a new combined world. Maybe it's a new combined world that uses the Xenoblade 2 world as its base? Xenoblade 2 is shown to be the Earth that was left behind, so you could say it was the original universe, while Xenoblade 1 is the new universe, and maybe there's more universes than that when things were supposedly flung into distant dimensions or whatever. So if Xenoblade 2 is the base world for this new combination world, then presumably it would have Jupiter in its solar system, I guess. How is this stuff with Cosmos going to work? I guess I'm going to have to make space in my game schedule to play through Xenosaga now. With the credits showing a recap of this entire trilogy, and then the end hinting at a tie-in to another Xeno series, it feels very much like this is meant to be the end of Xenoblade. Makes me wonder if Monolith Soft's next game is going to be Xeno something else, as it ties Xenoblade and Xenosaga together. But speaking of tying things together, how the heck is Xenoblade Chronicles X canon? Like, don't get me wrong, I've wanted it to be tied in some way for years, but I've got more questions than answers right now. In the Xenoblade trilogy, the Conduit appeared, became like a perpetual motion infinite energy machine with connections to other universes. People waged war over it. Klaus lost his faith in humanity and used the Conduit to make a new world, and so Xenoblade 1 and 2 were born. In Xenoblade Chronicles X, this isn't spoilers, it's literally the beginning of the game and what's been shown in trailers anyway. These two alien races decide to duke it out right over Earth, so people flee on Ark ships to find a new home, and Earth is destroyed in the battle. So, how can both these things be true? I might not have to wait long to get the answer because X Definitive Edition is right around the corner and promises new story content, so I remember being excited finding out it's canon, but wait, how does that even make any sense? And then just being very confused. Check out my X Definitive playthrough to find out the answer to that question, I guess. Easy plug. Alright, I thought Monados/Aegises got their powers from the Conduit, but now the Conduit is gone, and yet we still have all three true Monados in Xenoblade 3. A part of Ontos becomes evil, while another part of him becomes a Polish Comsci major. Malos is dead, probably. Maybe he's like a Force Ghost or something. But his core crystal is heavily implied to still exist within N's Sword of the End. Pyra and Mithra, no idea what happened to them, or any of the other Xenoblade Chronicles 1 or 2 characters outside of the ones present here, and yet their core crystal is still around in Matthew's Gauntlet. Also, I guess that sort of answers why Lucky 7 was a Monado in the main game, when the Sheath/Iron Man arm Riku designed for it follows the same design pattern as Matthew's Gauntlets, meaning Numa's core crystal is probably in there if he just repurposed the gauntlets into the sword sheath. So, Noah has Numa's core crystal, while N has Logos' core crystal, probably. But how do they get their power if the Conduit doesn't exist anymore? I mean, in Xenoblade 1 there was only one true Monado, Alvis, while Zanza and Mayneths were... I don't know. Look, I'm a Turbo Xenoblade nerd, but I'm not that big of a nerd that I can tell you the answer to every little thing like that. So, whatever was going on with Zanza and Mayneth's Monados are what's going on with the Swords of the End in this game, probably, if I had to hazard a guess. Also, why did Shulk, Rex, and A have to sacrifice themselves? It's implied that annihilation events will keep on happening because the world is unstable like it is, so them becoming a part of the world, or becoming a part of Origin or whatever, taking over the role that Ontos had, I suppose, stabilizes it. How does that work? What? Why, huh? Apparently they can just remove people from the cycle, which they do so for their implied kids, despite the fact that it breaks some sort of rules, because implied Ontos and Numa would have done it without a second thought. What are the rules? How is this breaking them? Are they becoming like new gods of this world like Shulk at the end of Xenoblade 1? Why can't they interfere in the world more? Is that against the rules? Just so the events of the main game can actually happen? The Liberators and Moebius agreed to stay out of each other's business until the stuff with Alpha was resolved. Well, Shulk and Rex are capable of breaking flame clocks, and we see in Colony 9 liberated soldiers being taught how to live normally, implying Shulk and Rex have been getting up all in Zed's business and breaking their compact. Also, does this one Moebius just not bother to fact check things? He has it out for Shulk now because his Moebius pals were cut down, something Shulk has nothing to do with. This is also another instance of the bad guy a character wants to go with is unnecessarily mean for no reason to give the character the final push to switch to the good guy's side. Why? Glimmer showed that she can still be useful despite not being tied to a flame clock. She doesn't have that long left anyway, And Mio showed that liberated soldiers can still be homecominged. Maybe he wants to take her out because that gets her back into the cycle. But he doesn't say anything implying this. And what does the fusion of the Ferronuses do anyway? It makes one single, bigger, easier to hit target, and yet it's apparently much more threatening than the two on their own? Does it somehow give them a power level increase? That was something I didn't really get in the main game either. Like, here's one Moebius that can use powers from both the individual Moebius, but what's the advantage over just having them fight side by side using their own powers individually? I guess it grants some sort of buff, and the same thing applies to fusing machines together? I didn't realize I was playing Tears of the Kingdom. Also, what the heck is going on with Shulk, Rex, and Riku anyway? By the time of the DLC story, the Endless Now has been going on for quite some time. We know that Noah's gone through at least all of the lifetimes we see in the flashbacks, had a kid, and that kid is now an elderly man, and Shulk and Rex are looking none too shabby for their age. And Riku lives from the DLC story until the main game, however much of a gap that is. At least enough for a new city to be founded and the DLC characters to have died off and had statues made of them, and he's looking exactly the same as in the DLC. Are these three just some sort of immortal beings or something? I guess the other characters from Xenoblade 1 and 2 just died of old age or something, while Melie and Nia have lengthened lifespans due to their races, and Shulk, Rex, and Riku are weirdly immortal. I'm sure there probably do exist answers to a lot of these questions, but two things. One, while I do enjoy stories that have deeper lore you can delve into to have more of the overall picture come together, you shouldn't have to make the story feel like it makes any sense. Like, I thought I was playing Xenoblade, not Dark Souls, or Architect Forbid Bravely Default 2. And two, being a Turbo Xenoblade nerd, I'd usually be the kind of person to go down the YouTube rabbit hole of theories people have made and different explanations for why things are the way they are. But I just completely lacked any motivation to do so for this game. Because even if I take the time to make the full picture actually make sense, it doesn't matter. It's all undone at the end of the game, meaning this stuff I could research has no long-term implications. So I just genuinely don't care, and I never bothered. I did for a long time love the mysteries Xenoblade held for people to piece together, as these pieces would grow your understanding of the overall narrative. This game, understanding the pieces only helps you understand the narrative of this world that's just Thanos snapped away at the end anyway, so who cares? Maybe the next game will find a way to make the events of Ionios actually matter, and I'll find myself revisiting Xenoblade 3 to try and truly understand it. But yeah, everything is reset. Everything is undone, like you just lost progress on a save file. I suppose this means Shulk loses his prosthetic arm, and Rex regains his missing eye, stripping these two of these badassery tools, though if I'm being honest, I don't think that we're gonna see them again in future games. Just like with the main game, there were themes, symbolism, and arguments I did genuinely enjoy about the story, but the actual events of the plot just had me perpetually confused about how any of this makes any sense, with the erasure of this world at the end killing any motivation I could have had to put in the extra time to actually make sense of it. Necessity of plot. Again. Remember when we discussed moving the story forward and having a plot that feels essential? This doesn't move the story forward much. At least unlike the main game, you could argue it does a tiny little smidge. This DLC story shows that X is canon. We just don't know how that makes any sense yet and hope that the new content of Definitive Edition may shed some light on that. Cosmos is seemingly coming, and Xenosaga is tied in, what with the whole radio name drop as well, but that also just feels more like a teaser for next time. We don't actually know what it means yet. Here's seemingly children of characters we know, and I think that's the only ways it actually moves the story forward. So really the only ways that this moves forward is fan service and teasers for next time. But the bigger thing that I wanted to talk about was the necessity of plot. Did this plot feel like it was necessary? Just like the main game? Absolutely not. This plot happened because the machine that has previously been good decided to be evil this time. Alvis was an interesting character in the first game. Surely there would be some deep-seated reason why he's doing as he's doing, like we saw with Amalthus in Xenoblade 2. He decides the city people born in this world should be saved and brought to a new world that's recreated the way it once was pre-Klaus, and all the people stuck in the cycle can screw off and die. Why? Because he's part of the Trinity processor, which means he's big brain while you're not. You'd never understand his reasons. I don't know what you call it, but you know what I call it? Bad writing. We have A here, so we don't feel completely betrayed by an established character. This is the part of them that adventured with Shulk. And because everything is undone, it feels especially unnecessary. Presumably at the end of the game, Alpha would be back to being Alvis again, and not yet have decided to turn evil. Man, if Shulk and Alvis ever grab lunch together, that's gonna be awkward, isn't it? Alvis probably just got uninvited from all the get-togethers. I was planning on having an in-depth discussion about this necessity of plot during this chapter, but what more can I really say? We've been through this already with Moebius. This plot didn't have to happen. It just happened because this completely unexpected and out-of-nowhere thing just so happened to happen with no true reason behind it. Also, isn't Alvis the true Monado from Xenoblade 1? Why does he wield Zanza's Monado 1, aka the weakest one? Alpha, can't this thing not even cut people, you dumb bitch? Anyway, the conclusion. All in all, I did really appreciate the themes, symbolism, arguments, and deeper meaning behind Xenoblade Chronicles 3. It does provide a lot you can really unpack and discern meaning from. It's just, the plot it uses to deliver that message is just so convoluted, convenient, nonsensical, stakeless, unnecessary, and isolated. It feels like you have to analyze this thing like the FNAF timeline to force it to feel like it somehow makes sense. Otherwise, as a casual viewer, it just hopes that the short-term emotional responses the plot is built off of non-stop of is enough to keep you interested until the end. This game's plot is like the McDonald's of Xenoblade Trilogy storytelling. It's good, but sloppily handled and not going to make a long-term impression. I still think it's better than the story of Xenoblade Chronicles X, which is another story that genuinely makes no sense that maybe Definitive Edition will answer. At least Xenoblade Chronicles 3 has deeper meaning you can enjoy. But when the plot is so clunky that it makes you ask if it just invalidated the entire argument of the story it's telling, I don't even know how to finish this sentence. It's just such a ludicrous mess. The fan service and countless familiar things players can recognize is nice, but it doesn't salvage this story. There are some stories I experience where by the end I think, hey, I sort of liked it, / think it had a lot of potential, but it was heavily flawed and I'd change a lot of things about it. Examples of that would be things like The Hidden Treasure of Area Zero, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, or Assassin's Creed 3, to name a few. In a lot of those cases, I feel like the core story can be kept the same, but a lot of things change to solve the issues I had with it. They're flawed, but salvageable. Is this the case with Xenoblade Chronicles 3? No, I really don't think it is. Reason being, the core story is the root cause of so many of the issues I had, and it created a ripple effect into other aspects of the plot. I do think it's really cool to have a trilogy where the first title was all about the future and who can control it. The second title is all about the past and how it dictates our actions now, and the third title is all about the present. But in making a plot that takes place in a single moment in time, where soldiers fight and respawn over and over again, well, you've now created a long list of problems you're going to have to try and solve. Or, I mean, you could just not, I guess. Yes, the game did have a lot of things I enjoyed about it, and I'd say it was a better plot than most of what I play around here where story isn't a big focus. This isn't an inherently bad story, but rather what feels like a desperate struggle to create a good story out of a fundamentally flawed premise, and it isn't exactly free from tripping and stumbling along the way. This isn't a story where things happen as a natural consequence of the world and the characters that make it up. Rather, this is a story where events have to be this exact thing, so the world and characters are going to bend in whatever way they need to lead to those exact events, even if it doesn't make any sense. The storytelling is backwards. This can happen once or twice in a plot and I can forgive it, like Metalface being called back when he could have taken the Monado then and there. That's pretty bullshit, but I don't dislike Xenoblade Chronicles 1 because of it, because this level of convenience isn't a frequent occurrence. Xenoblade Chronicles 3, on the other hand, does this constantly. It's basically the entire plot. You have to always be willing to suspend disbelief. It's a great plot, just don't think about it too hard. Just take in the fan service and short-term emotional responses we're going for. Xenoblade Chronicles 1 and 2 are some of my favorite games of all time. I figured that Xenoblade 3 that now combines them both would blow my socks off as well. And I'll admit I fell into the short-term emotional responses the game was trying to get out of me for a while. But as I really thought about the plot more and more, rather than my appreciation for them strengthening like with the first two titles, I instead began to doubt this game more and more until I started to ask, was it even really that good? If this is a story you love, believe me, I can understand why. If this is a story you hate, believe me, I can understand why. Compared to the first two, I think what best describes what I feel to the third story is indifference, and appreciation for what was attempted, but a lingering frustration for the way it was handled. I don't hate this game by any means. I mean, look, I've got Xenoblade 3 posters on my walls. Look, there's one with N and Console M and Noah and Mio. There's one of Nia from Xenoblade 2. Wah, follow me, camera. But technically it's a Xenoblade 3 poster because it's in the Xenoblade 3 costume. Wah, come on, tracking camera. Look, you can see that. And then at the back wall here, I have posters of like all three of the games. Come on, this way, camera. Look, and they're cool, you know? But I just can't find myself loving Xenoblade 3 like I do the first two games. I think that's really all I've got to say. I'm usually not the kind of person to be like, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below, because I feel like that's usually just a disingenuous bid from YouTubers to get algorithm brownie points. But this game, I know was a lot more iffy with people from what I saw online in the months after release. Now that it's 2.5 years later, or more depending on when you're watching this, and many players have had the chance to look back on it by now, I am genuinely curious what people think about the game. So, what did you think about Xenoblade Chronicles 3? Love it? Hate it? Or feel something closer to what I feel? Did this game have you really feeling it? Or could it have learned a thing or three? Anyway, thanks for watching the video, and let's cross our fingers X Definitive Edition actually answers some of the questions that have been surrounding that story for almost a decade.